It is the Awesemo MLB Deeper Dive, sponsored by Jock Market. I hope you guys are having a good day. Hope that we're off to a good start to the week. Do us a favor on the way in. Give us a like. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't done it already. I suspect a lot of people watching have already done so, but if not, it does us a lot of help. Definitely helps us in the YouTube algorithm. But beyond that, Adam, you and I, we did this show, the strategy show this morning, pretty similar to this show. But is there anything that's really changed for you since we talked about the games this morning?
No, not really. Still waiting on a confirmed Dodgers pitcher. It looks like it could be Andre Jackson being called up from AAA, but haven't seen that confirmed. Other than that, no, pretty much same as it was this morning.
All right, so we could dive right in. First game on the slate. It is the New York Yankees at home against the Los Angeles Angels. First thing we have to talk about here, Garrett Cole, who's going to be massively popular, one of the most popular pitchers on the slate, and very difficult to avoid, even though he's coming off the COVID list. We haven't seen him pitch in about 2.5 weeks, but a weak pitching slate. He was pitching fairly well before he first went on the COVID list. So Garrett Cole, how high of a priority is he for you to pay up for today?
He's definitely towards the top because, like you said, there's some question marks, like exactly how deep can he go into the game? Exactly, how long is the leash going to be if he does run into some trouble in, say, the 5th or 6th inning? But I still think the question marks on Cole are considerably less than they are on most pitchers on this slate. He's getting a lot of ownership, but it's a 10 game slate, I think. 10 game slate. So there's plenty of low owned bats you can go to kind of counteract his ownership. And I do like the matchup with the Angels because they are a team that has typically quite a few more strikeouts in their lineup now than they did earlier in the season when you replace guys like Mike Trout and Anthony Rendon with Joe Adell, Brandon Marsh, two of their top hitting prospects, but both guys that have struck out nearly 40% of the time so far in their major league careers. So a little bit higher upside matchup against the Angels than it was earlier in the year as well.
Yeah, and then still, you look at Garrett Cole in our top pitchers tool, which is free to use today. He is projecting for a whole bunch of ownership on DraftKings today, 46.2%. And usually when we see pitchers projected that highly in the ownership, they appear to be negatively leveraged, but not even really the case for Garrett Cole. 41.5% chance to be a top 2 pitcher, which is astronomical odds. Over on FanDuel at 11,400, he's actually projected to be not quite as popular, 11% ownership, a little bit under owned with a 14.6% chance to be a top pitcher. On FanDuel, at least people really seem to be gravitating towards Touki Toussaint and his cheap 7,900 price tag. So Garrett Cole on both sites is going to be a very high priority option for me. Then on the other side of the game, it is going to be Jose Suarez on the mound for the Angels. No need to roster him against the Yankees, in my opinion. But one thing we have to talk about with the Yankees is they're a fairly expensive stack. We also need to pay up for pitching to some extent on this slate without a lot of cheap pitchers to go off of. So with that in mind, how easy are you finding it to get to the Yankees, if at all?
I think the Yankees are in a decent spot. Suarez hasn't been bad this year, but it is still a high upside offense against a pitcher that, we don't have a long track record of being exceptionally good either. He has struck out about 22% of righties, 128 expected ISO. The problem that I think you run into is just there's a lot of offenses in very good spots tonight. Right now, it looks like the Yankees ownership is coming in, give or take, where it should be, whereas there's some teams around them that are projected to get a little bit less ownership than it seems like they should. So I think the Yankees are a perfectly fine stack. I expect to have some, across 150 lineups, but in 3 max, I don't think they'd be one of the 3 that I'm going to.
Yeah, it's the main thing here with the Yankees to me is they look about appropriately owned, 5.4% chance to be a top stack today, 5.3% ownership share. And it is hard to get to them under the ideal lineup construction I want today. There are spots where I'm willing to pay up for offense to be a little bit more contrarian, but the Yankees are about appropriately owned. And if we're rostering them, we have to play some of these riskier cheap pitchers. And I'd rather do that with some of the offenses that are under-owned, such as the Padres, which we're going to talk about later. But, as for the Yankees, about appropriately owned and a little bit tough to get to them. So hard to prioritize them for me. Next game we have here on the slate, it is the Cincinnati Reds against the Chicago Cubs. Wade Miley on the mound for Cincinnati. And just as when we talked about him this morning, he's fairly popular, Wade Miley. And there are not very many slates where Wade Miley is popular. He's a good real life pitcher, but not really as much for fantasy purposes because of the lack of strikeout upside. But this is the Chicago Cubs offense, which has been terrible ever since the trade deadline. So Wade Miley, a pitcher that neither you nor I have really rostered all that much this year, is he somebody you think you're going to be getting to more than normal today just because of the matchup?
Yeah, just because there's a lack of alternatives and he's relatively cheap on a slate where I do want to pay up for some bats. This is kind of going to be the case for a lot of pitchers that we talk about, where I think he's over-owned relative to his chances of success, but he's still someone that I'll get to because I think it's going to be easier to just roster low-owned bats and then get pitchers that project relatively well, even if they are a little bit overowned, because you can't just look at them in a vacuum of, oh, I think this guy's too popular, because you still have to fill out your lineup. And that's where ownership really matters, is across everyone in your lineup. And when you say that Miley, or when I say that Miley is overowned, yeah, I think that there's, like, when you compare him to all these other pitchers, there's probably one or two that are going to beat him, but I'm not really interested in just trying to make like 25 lineups where I'm playing, Braxton Garrett and Quantrill and Hernandez and Steele and Harvey and all these guys and saying, oh yeah, one or two of them is going to beat Miley for sure, because that's just, a waste of resources. It's better to just say, okay, I think, I have a low enough owned lineup because of whatever stacks I'm playing. Wade Miley fits in here. I'll go there. It is a good matchup against the Cubs. He's okay at preventing runs. He has gotten pretty lucky this year. His xFIP's a full run higher than his ERA. His expected power numbers are worse than his actual numbers, and it's a tough park to pitch in, but the Cubs just still aren't a great offense, and Miley typically does a good enough job of limiting damage that I'll take my chances on him on this particular slate.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too is this isn't a normal slate where I think we need to totally maximize upside for our starting pitchers. Obviously, it's nice to get big games out of them, but I just don't know how many cheap starting pitchers are realistically going to pitch well today. And there is a scenario where an expensive, lower-owned offense goes out and scores 10 to 12 runs, the Padres, and then we just need salary savings at pitcher, and then you might get to a point where Wade Miley puts up 14 fantasy points, and maybe somebody like Jayco Dorizzi scores 12 fantasy points, and just everybody else sucks in this price range. And that could potentially be something that gets us to an optimal lineup, because it's really hard to feel good about any of these cheaper options today. So that's something that's going to have me on Wade Miley, probably not quite as much as the field, but certainly more than I've rostered Wade Miley at any other point this season, just because it's so hard to find cheaper pitchers today. On the other side of this game, Justin Steele is going to be starting for the Cubs. He is a cheaper pitching option. He's delivered okay results this year, but it doesn't seem all that likely he's going to go deep into the game.
Yeah, I mean, he went 5 innings in his start against Milwaukee last time out. He threw 70 pitches. I'm assuming you get something like 70 to 80 pitches here, but it is a pretty tough spot. No Jesse Winker is nice, even though it's lefty-lefty. He's still a good hitter, but still has to deal with India, Castellanos, Votto. Somebody else is missing here too, but I can't place it. Kyle Farmer's hitting 4th, Suarez, Aquino. No Stevenson either. So it is a little bit of a watered-down lineup for Cincinnati. Makes it look a little bit better for Steele, who is really cheap. And I do think on slates like this, there is merit in tournaments to just kind of saying, who's the cheapest viable pitcher that I can go to? And that would be Justin Steele, at least depending on who ends up starting for the Dodgers, because that hasn't been confirmed yet. So I think you can make that case for him, that combined with the fact that it is a watered down Cincinnati lineup, but still 5.7 implied run total, still plenty of dangerous bats in this lineup for the Reds.
Yeah, and I was going to look through the ownership, see like, okay, who's a cheaper starting pitcher that I want to get to instead of Steele, but he's the cheapest on the slate. So I'm not going to find anybody cheaper than that. One thing that is kind of interesting with Steele compared to this morning, if I remember correctly, I think he's projected for 2% ownership. He's up to 6.7 now, which, it's not a massive amount of ownership by any means, but we have seen that go up a little bit. Also, one other thing of note with Steele here, he does have a 22.2% chance to be a top 2 value pitcher on the slate. So that's a little bit significant. He's not in my player pool right now, but I will see maybe when I build lineups later, if I'm trying to really force in more Padres stacks, maybe that will up my exposure to Steele. But right now, I'm still a little unsure about him. But on the other side, stacking against it with the Reds, I know you mentioned it's a little bit of a watered down lineup, but are there any individual hitters that do stand out to you that would make you want to stack this team?
So one other thing, kind of just like overarching to mention with Steele, my overall exposure to him, I do think will be impacted by what the Dodgers do. If Andre Jackson is making the start, he's been starting pretty much all year in the minors, and he's facing the Pirates, and he's 4K on DraftKings. I would just rather go to him if he's going to be like the long guy here or make this start. Whereas if we don't get any confirmation about him, then Steele's going to look better. As far as the Reds go, Castellanos, first and foremost, really, really stands out at 4,800. But you do get a cheap cleanup hitter in Kyle Farmer. You get a cheap 5 hitter and 6 hitter in Suarez and Aquino. India is good leading off as well. So I still think the Reds are a good stack. Not quite as good as they would have been if you had Stevenson and Winker in there. But still right now with the 5th highest top stack percentage and not really getting much ownership. So I do like the Reds, and it is a good park as well.
Yeah, and there are also with Farmer heading higher in the order, there is better value options, I think, than if we had earlier in the day, which is always kind of a catch-22 with some MLB DFS, where it's like, okay, one of the better hitters is in the lineup, but then in his place, you get a cheap guy who's cheaper than would normally be in that lineup spot and gets a little bit of a boost from from that perspective. So I don't mind getting overweight to the field on the Reds. We do have them as being one of the more positively leveraged stacks on both FanDuel and DK today. Now, next game on the slate here is another one that kind of brings an interesting talking point because it's the Atlanta Braves in Miami against the Marlins. Touki Toussaint is going to be on the mound for Atlanta, and he hasn't been great this year. He hasn't been terrible. He's been a fairly middle-of-the-road pitcher. He's produced some good fantasy results because of a high strikeout rate. Obviously, this is a good matchup, but he is so popular because of the lack of pitching options on the slate. So on DK, he's projected for 43.4% ownership, the second most popular pitcher on the slate behind Garrett Cole. Then over on FanDuel, he's projected for a massive 33.7% ownership share, making him the most rostered pitcher by a mile over on FanDuel. So with all this ownership going to Toussaint, how are you going to approach this in tournaments?
He's another example, just like Miley, where I think he's over-owned if you're just looking at him. For example, we have Frankie Montas, who's $1,100 more expensive on DraftKings and has a slightly higher chance of being a top two pitcher, getting about half the ownership of Toussaint. It's not typically that hard to save $1,000 on bats if so you can spend up a little bit more on pitching. So, for example, that's one spot that I think it does make sense. If you just look at the two of them, it's like, yeah, okay, Montas is probably a little bit under-owned compared to Toussaint, who is over-owned. But at the same time, he does project very well for an $8,400 salary. I think he has a higher ceiling than Wade Miley does just because the strikeout numbers are better. And he does have a really good matchup. He goes into Miami, which is a favorable park for pitching, and faces a Miami team that really isn't very good. Their active roster against right-handed pitching this season has the seventh highest strikeout percentage, sixth or seventh lowest walk percentage, and third worst WRC plus. The lineup they're running out there certainly has plenty of strikeouts in it. No Miguel Rojas at the top is a benefit as well because he's someone that can actually have some good at bats and make life pretty difficult. But the thing with Toussaint is that when he's bad, he's typically just going to be really bad. This is someone who so far this year in the majors has actually only walked 7.8% of hitters, but at AAA, he had about a 15% walk percentage. In the majors in 2020, he was around 13.5%. In 2019, he was about 13%. There's no real reason to think that as he gets more starts with the Braves, his walk numbers aren't going to climb and be where they've been pretty much his entire career. So he's someone that's very, very capable of just falling behind hitters, walking them, racking up his pitch count, and then, gives up a home run or two, and it's just a bad start. So still a really, really low floor for a pitcher that's getting 40+% ownership, but he's one of the highest upside pitchers. He's got one of the best spots going up against Miami. So I understand why the ownership's there. And in lineups where I'm going to lower owned hitters, I'm going to be fine just going to Toussaint and hoping for the best.
Yeah, and just for reference, in the build that I made before we're doing the show, not my final one or anything, but just my current version of lineups, I'd read around 35% Toussaint, so still a significant portion, but I came in a little bit underweight to the field. However, on the other side, I wasn't really getting to the Marlins, and this is a spot where generally I would like to stack a team against a chalky starting pitcher because I think some of the best leverage stacks come when we could roster against a chalky starting pitcher who's picking up a ton of ownership, but isn't really a lights out starter because that's always somebody who has a chance to get blown up. But one of the issues I have with the Marlins, we only have them with a 1% chance to be the top scoring team on the slate. They do have a 0.6% ownership share. So this isn't a team that's massively positively leveraged. They have the lowest top stack odds of any team on the slate. I wouldn't be opposed to playing them in large field GPPs. I just didn't quite get to it. So I'm going to ask you, how many lineups would you have to play before you start to consider putting Marlins into your build?
More than 20, I think. Like I'd be playing 150 max. And I think one thing that does work in their favor is they're really cheap. So not only are you getting leverage against Toussaint, but it allows you to get a build where you're going like Cole Gausman or Cole plus Montas or something like that. So at least, you're getting leverage and you're getting a couple of the only good pitchers on the slate if you go to Miami, but it's still, a really low probability spot. You still really only want to do it in those large field top heavy tournaments. For example, the $5, I think it's $100K to first on DraftKings today.
Yeah, and a 300,000 total prize pool. So 33% of the prize pool goes to first. If you're playing 150 lineups, if you don't come like top 3 or 4, chances are you probably lost money for the night. So yeah, that is where if you're looking to be massively contrarian would make most sense because a third of the prize pool going to first place. On the other side, Braxton Garrett is going to be on the mound against Atlanta. Now, one thing that really stood out to me about Garrett earlier in the day is he was projected for double-digit ownership on DK. That's come down a little bit, but still 9%. So if you start to look at these cheaper pitchers who are priced below Wade Miley, this is the most popular pitcher on the slate who has really a value-saving price tag. So Braxton Garrett, 7,400. No reason to really consider him on FanDuel, but on DK at 7,400. How much of a consideration does he become for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the 9 to 10% ownership makes sense on DraftKings just because he's a relatively cheap pitcher that could do well, and could do well kind of gets it done on this slate, I think. So it's not a good spot against Atlanta at all. It is a good ballpark to pitch in. There's not really much else I can say beyond that. I don't think Braxton Garrett's particularly good. He has a 22% strikeout percentage with Miami this year, but also has a 10% walk percentage, 4.2 xFIP, not a particularly highly regarded prospect. I don't like the matchup, but I do realize that, especially if you're someone that is playing a lot of lineups, there's not really cheap pitching on this slate that you're going to want to like put all your eggs into that basket and say like, oh, it's not Braxton Garrett, it's Jayco Dorizzi, or it's whoever. The realistic answer is one or two of these guys probably do okay, but your guess is as good as mine. Their chances of success are pretty similar. And so you probably will see one or two of these guys get a little bit more ownership than others. Right now, it does look like Garrett compared to someone like Odorizzi, but it's kind of just, Odorizzi, Garrett, Cal Quantrill, guys like that. They're in very similar situations where individually they're unlikely to do well, but as a collective like unit, there's probably going to be one or two that do well. So if you're playing 3 max, you probably just kind of end up staying away from all of them. If you're playing 150 max, you probably just kind of mix and match and then hope for the best.
And to address the question, our YouTube chat, Ryan Stubbs had asked, is there any free content on the site today? The top pitchers tool, which could be really helpful for a slate like this, where there's like 2 good pitchers, and then we're just kind of wading through a bunch of garbage, or pitchers like Frankie Montas who are in tough matchups. So for me, this is going to be really key to find out, like, hey, which guys are like 2% owned that have a 10% chance of being a top scoring pitcher. And those are some of the guys I'm going to be mixing and matching with higher priced offenses, and crossing my fingers that I just hit on a couple of them, because this is a slate where it's really difficult to find starting pitching. And the next game on the slate, another one where we're not going to find pitchers to really be interested in. It is the Tampa Bay Rays at home against the Baltimore Orioles. Colin McHugh on the mound for Tampa Bay most likely isn't going to be working deep into the game. He's been throwing like 30-ish pitches in his recent outings. It's most likely going to be a bullpen game for the Rays. And then on the other side, Matt Harvey is going to be on the mound for Baltimore. So starting with the Harvey end of the equation, he was terrible to start the year. He's pitched better over the course of the last month or so. But are the Tampa Bay Rays a team that you're prioritizing on this slate?
I think they look okay. They're projected to go a little bit under-owned. And even if you think Harvey is like an average pitcher, which I do, it still wouldn't be surprising at all if a lineup that has as much power as Tampa does, if they're able to get to him. And even if they don't, if let's say they throw up 2 or 3 runs on Harvey and get him out after like 5 innings, you're still going to get 4 innings or 3 innings, I guess, depending on what the score is, of a pretty bad Baltimore bullpen. So the upside's certainly there for Tampa. Pricing isn't bad. Brandon Lau's priced up, but he should be. G-Man Choi, Arozarena are cheap. Wendell and Brosseau are pretty cheap. Brett Phillips, flat minimum. And I think I've had 3 slates this season where I've been heavy on him, and he's hit a grand slam in all of them. So that's been fun. Easily one of my favorite players in baseball now. No Nelson Cruz does water the lineup down a little bit, but also makes them cheaper. Point being, I think that, the park works against them. I think Harvey is average. He's probably better than like half the pitchers on this slate in terms of talent, but still a really high upside spot that's not getting much ownership for Tampa.
Yeah. And, Harvey, while he has pitched better, it's not the best park for hitting. One thing that does help Tampa Bay relative to when we talked about them earlier in the day is, off the top of my head, I think they were projected for a 5.8% ownership share on DraftKings. Now they're down to 3.6%. So roughly half the ownership versus what they had earlier in the day, considering the upside of going up against Matt Harvey, who, if the guy who was pitching at the beginning of the season shows up again, that was a guy who's giving up home runs no matter where he pitched. He sucked everywhere. So if that guy shows up again, which I think is within the realm of possibility, it's an upside spot for the Rays, and a little more palpable now that the ownership has come down. Now, Colin McHugh is going to be on the mound for Tampa Bay. This is going to mostly be a bullpen game. I'm going to find it hard to get to Baltimore Orioles stacks, just because those bullpen games, number one, the Rays have a good bullpen. But then number two, it's tough to generate upside a lot of times against bullpen games, because we see a lot of quality relievers come into the games, and they are generally better pitchers than some of the middle tier starters. So Baltimore is one of my least appealing teams to look at.
Yeah, same here. Just a really, it's a tough park to hit in. It's a tough matchup against the Rays bullpen game. The one thing I would point out is that we are looking for value bats on this slate. And I think there's several spots where everyone's going to flock to. I think using Anthony Santander, Austin Hayes, DJ Stewart, who are 2,700, 2,700, and 2K respectively on DraftKings as lower owned contrarian options does make some sense. Not that it's a particularly good spot for them individually, but they probably also are just going to come in at lower ownership than they should relative to some of the other more popular hitters that people are going to go to. And then one other thing to note on this game, Randy Arozarena was just scratched from the Tampa Bay lineup. We just got a new one. Manny Margot is replacing him. So I I'm kind of starting to get a little bit of interest in a $6,300 Harvey. Like now he's facing, Tampa Bay still is a dangerous lineup, but now he's facing them without Nelson Cruz and without Randy Arozarena. Looking at strikeout percentages for the guys in this lineup, Brandon Lau is very good, but he does strike out 26% of the time against right-handed pitching. Brett Phillips is at 35%. G-Man Choi is at 27% for the season. Kiermaier's at 23%. Margot has been not a very good hitter, but only strikes out about 18%. Mike Brosseau this year is at like 40%. And overall, I think for his career, I want to say he's upper 20s. So there are some strikeouts here in a good pitcher's park on a slate with no good pitching. Still not going to feel good about it, but starting to get a little bit more interest in Harvey now that we have this Tampa lineup.
Yeah, and I was looking for a little bit more information because for my own personal reasons, I was going to make an AL Rookie of the Year bet had it been a serious injury for Arozarena, but no serious injury, just a routine day off. The original lineup with him in, not injury related. It was just a mistake based on what I found on Twitter. So Randy Arozarena could be available to pinch hit, but yeah, this is somewhat of an appealing looking matchup now for Matt Harvey, who obviously we're not going to back him as being some kind of great starting pitcher or anything like that. But let's look at some of the other pitchers who are in this price range that we have to compare him to, because it's not really great options. We've got Matt Harvey's at 6,300 on 6,700 on DK. And another thing also that I'll mention, which I talked about some of the other poor starting pitchers before for FanDuel purposes. There's no reason to roster Harvey on FanDuel, but for DK, where he's, a cheap price point, we're looking at other guys in his salary range. It's like Dallas Keuchel. It's Carlos Hernandez, Jayco Dorizzi, Griffin Jax. I don't feel good about any of those guys either. So Matt Harvey against a watered down Rays lineup, if you get to like 5% of them, I don't hate that at all.
Yeah, that's kind of what it is for me. I'm not making some case where like Matt Harvey is definitely going to have a good game, but we'll kind of have the same conversation when we get the Carlos Hernandez at 6,600. But take a pitcher 7K or below on DraftKings and explain to me why they are likely to have a good game or why I should feel good about them. And I can't do it for any of them. Maybe somebody else can. But so just looking at Matt Harvey and saying, oh, well, it's Matt Harvey isn't quite enough on this slate to get me away from him.
Yeah, one thing that's funny. So we had Brandon Wagner in the YouTube chat asked how risky you guys are willing to get with pitchers today, and then we backed Matt Harvey after that. So that should answer that question. If we're willing to get to Matt Harvey, I think we're willing to get pretty risky with pitching today. But there's no way to not get risky with pitching unless you're just going like, hey, I'm playing Kevin Gausman and Garrett Cole and Touki Toussaint. Anybody else you roster is relatively risky on this slate, and I kind of think you have to do that to some extent. If you're just playing mass amounts of lineups and you're playing those three guys, everybody else in the field is also. So I'm going to be looking to get away from them to some extent, and that means making some risky lineups. One other way that you could get a little bit different next game on the slate, Frankie Montas on the mound for the Oakland A's going up against the Chicago White Sox. Obviously a difficult matchup for Frankie Montas. However, relative to some of the other top arms on the slate, he's not picking up the same kind of ownership. So right now I have 22.7% projected ownership going to Touki Toussaint compared to 46% for Garrett Cole, 35% for Gausman. So if you're paying up for a pitcher and want to differentiate a little bit, Montas appears to offer the best differential in terms of ownership.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
So Montas, obviously the matchup is far from ideal, but how much do you think you're going to be looking to get to Montas in lineups compared to guys like Cole and Gausman?
I think given the current ownership, he's my favorite GPP pitcher, except for, maybe Garrett Cole. But I just don't really think, I don't think Montas should be getting half the ownership of Toussaint. I kind of think he should be around where Gausman is. As much as I like Kevin Gausman, I have some questions about him as well. And he's getting like 1.5 times the ownership of Montas. And I just think Montas is a good pitcher. The White Sox have a relatively dangerous lineup, but there are some strikeouts in this lineup as well. You have Sebi Zavala in there who has struck out 48% of the time in a limited sample this year. But you also have Goodwin, who's like a 27% strikeout rate against righties. Luis Robert for his career is around 30%. Pretty much everyone at the top is like around 22 to 23%, which isn't great, isn't great for Montas, but it's not terrible either. And the thing with Montas is we've seen his strikeout numbers against right-handed hitters climb as the season's gone on, which is something that I think was expected because for the season, he struck out about 31% of left-handed hitters so far, and that can be attributed. That's a lot better than he has done in previous seasons, but it can be attributed to an uptick in his splitter usage and using that pitch as a strikeout pitch against lefties. His overall strikeout numbers against righties are around 22% for the season, but he's had about the same pitch mix against righties as he has in the past when he has struck out 27 to 28% of righties. If you look over his last 10 starts, he has struck out about 27% of righties now. Over his last 5, he's at 32%. So you're seeing that number climb, which I think is a really good sign. And I just think Montas is a similar pitcher in terms of upside to guys like Gausman and Toussaint, and he's just not getting as much ownership.
Just because you brought up Savala's strikeout rate, I was kind of curious and looked at some of his minor league numbers. Have you ever looked at them? He sucked in the minor leagues. It's crazy he's had any success in the big leagues. Now, I know almost all of that came in that 1-3 homer game, but in the minor leagues this year, he had a 42.6% K rate and a 69 WRC plus. So overall in the big leagues, he has a 44.3% K rate for his career. He's somebody who looks fairly likely to strike out at least once today. So that is something that helps Montas because that's somebody who swing and misses a whole bunch. So I think that is something to consider with Montas. Also just ownership. He does offer some savings there compared to the other top arms.
Yeah, on the other side, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
I'm sure I'll regret saying this, but he kind of has a pitcher spot here.
Yeah, it is a little bit. I mean, he has a 104 WRC plus for the year, but he had a 69 WRC plus in AAA. If you look at his steamer projection for the rest of the year, he's a 66 WRC plus. So it's not exactly that, except in terms of strikeouts, he's striking out almost half of his at bats. So it definitely is a spot that is about as weak that you could possibly get in the lineup. So yeah, I think that's something Montas helps him at least a little bit if we're looking for at least reasons to be on a contrarian pitcher we like a little bit. But on the other side, Dallas Keuchel, both you and I talked about this earlier. We said like, hey, given the context of the slate, Dallas Keuchel looks like somebody we could get to, even though we rarely do, just because of the lack of pitching options. I think now, though, I'm a little more apt to get to Matt Harvey as that guy in this price range where I get to like 5% of. He's cheaper than Dallas Keuchel. I think he offers a little bit more strikeout upside, even though that isn't really saying much. I don't think there's much upside in either of them. But Dallas Keuchel, not that I was planning on getting to a lot of him, but I just don't think I have interest anymore.
Yeah, it's a really tough spot against Oakland. He's relatively expensive. Like 6,900 on DraftKings isn't expensive, but it's not really cheap when like I can just roster equally bad pitchers for less if I want to. He has struck out about 13% of right-handed hitters this year. He's facing an entirely right-handed lineup with the exception of Matt Olson, who's extremely good against left-handed pitching as well. And then Machine at the bottom, who's batting ninth. So not a huge deal there. And it's not like he has a high strikeout percentage against lefties anyway. And then he's also allowed about a 200 expected ISO to righties this year. And you've got a lot of right-handed power basically top to bottom in this lineup. So it's really tough for me to get the Keuchel. Like I would just rather roll the dice, I think, on someone either a little bit more expensive like Odorizzi, who's got a little bit more strikeout upside, or go cheaper and take my chances on somebody like a Matt Harvey, or if Jackson is expected to pitch for the Dodgers, just going all the way down there. All of that just seems Carlos Hernandez also, I think just more strikeout stuff, even though his matchup's also really tough. I think all of that just seems a little bit more appealing to me than going to Dallas Keuchel, who used to be really, really good at getting ground balls, had a higher strikeout percentage, was never a great strikeout guy, but would work deep in the games and still ended up being a decent fantasy option. Now he doesn't get strikeouts, but he still gets a decent amount of ground balls, but he's not as elite at it as he used to be. Gives up a lot more power than he used to. It's just tough for me to get to Dallas Keuchel.
Yeah, and then on the other side, the Oakland A's, even though, like you said, with Dallas Keuchel, his ground ball rate isn't quite what it used to be. His ground ball rate this year, although still very strong, 55.1%, down from his 58.3% ground ball rate for his career. But still, he's a guy who pitches fairly mediocrely to below average in most of his starts. So there's a lot of times he goes out there and it's like, hey, 6 innings, 3 runs given up by Dallas Keuchel, 6 innings, 4 runs, those kind of starts. So overall for the year, 4.51 ERA, 5.23 FIP, but he's been a guy for a lot of his career. We've seen him outperform his peripheral stats. We just don't see those games where he puts up really crooked numbers against him. He's only given up more than 4 runs 3 times the entire season. So the Oakland A's, they're a little bit expensive and about appropriately owned. It's hard for me to really prioritize them as a stack.
Yeah, it's a spot where, like, if I get to some of them in stack form, that's fine. But ideally, I think I'm getting to them as like one-offs or small 2-man, 3-man stacks, because I do think they're in a good spot individually. It's just that, like you said, Keuchel typically does a good enough job of just giving up like 3 or 4 runs, giving you 5 or 6 innings and getting out of the game. Individually, though, I do really like Yan Gomes. He's batting cleanup at $2,800. This is a catcher that does have power from the right side against Keuchel. Really, really good value there, I think. Mark Canha is a little underpriced at $3,900 leading off. So I like the salaries on those guys. And then, if you mix in some Marte or Chapman or Lowry or whatever, that gives you a nice, 3-man stack to go along with them.
All right, guys, today's show is sponsored by Jock Market. If you guys are new to Jock Market, head on over there, check it out. Download the Jock Market app in the Google Store, Apple Play Store, all that stuff. So Jock Market is it's a different way to play daily fantasy sports as opposed to just building lineups based on a salary cap or anything like that. We're looking at players as if they're stocks, and there's a Jock Market where you could bid on players in an IPO period before the slate starts, and after it locks. It doesn't mean your players are set in. You could buy and sell players after it started, and you could buy low on guys on players that get off to a slow start. You could sell high on guys that start quick that you think could slow down during the game. And if you're making your first deposit, use the promo code Awesemo, get up to a $50 bonus on your first deposit. That is over at Jock Market. All right, halfway through these games, and the next one to talk about here has some interesting pitching options. It is Carlos Hernandez on the mound for Kansas City, Jayco Dorizzi on the mound for Houston. Now, as far as cheap pitchers go, not that I feel confident in either of these guys, but relative to the context of this slate, I like both of them as GPP options quite a bit. They're both guys that I'm going to be overweight to the field on as SP2s. My preference is for Jayco Dorizzi, who's currently projected for 3.8% ownership, but an 8.2% chance to be one of the top 2 scoring pitchers on the slate. And then on the other side, Carlos Hernandez only projected for 0.5% ownership with a 6.6% chance to be a top pitcher. So first, Adam, I know that earlier today you were, I don't want to say high on Carlos Hernandez, put words in your mouth, but you did think he was a worthy GPP option. So what was some of the reasoning for that?
He sucks less than some of the other pitchers. So the reason I'm kind of interested in Hernandez is that I think there's some unknowns here because he hasn't been in the majors long. He's not a particularly highly regarded prospect, but he does have good stuff. The guy averages 97.5 miles an hour on his fastball. The first start I saw him make, I'd stacked against him, turned the game on in like the 5th inning, and he's out there touching 100 still. And I was just like, what the hell did I do? So he at least has the stuff where if he is at the top of his game, he can go out there and have a really good start. And there is like that chance. It's kind of like for anyone that plays best ball NFL, you've heard people talk about how taking like rookie and second year players gives you a little bit higher ceiling because they're an unknown and they could just be better than we expect. You kind of have that same thing here when you compare him to guys like Dallas Keuchel, that we know exactly what he is. You compare him to Matt Harvey. We know what Matt Harvey is. You're not going to look back in 2 years and say like, man, I wish I had started playing Matt Harvey earlier because he's so much better than I thought. You could possibly see that with Carlos Hernandez, even though it's not the most likely outcome. He does have good stuff. He's got a brutal matchup against Houston, but most importantly, he's just getting no ownership. He's cheap on a slate where every pitcher has question marks, basically, at least to some extent. And a lot of them have just as many as Hernandez does. So I'm just kind of willing to roll the dice on a guy that throws hard and maybe can have a good start here.
Yeah, 97.5 average mile per hour fastball velocity this year. And his numbers for the year, it's not something I would say is particularly sustainable. It's also a small sample size. It's going to make 5 starts, 17 appearances in general. So a lot of his outings have been out of the bullpen. That's also probably boosted his velocity a little bit. But like you said, he has been holding his velocity deeper into games in his starts. So 4.11 ERA, 3.87 expected ERA. I don't think Carlos Hernandez is bad. And like you said, a lot of these other cheap pitchers are bad. He's less bad than a lot of these guys in his price range. The matchup is obviously terrible, but 0.5% projected ownership, I think he's more likely to land in the optimal lineup than 0.5% of the time. And another thing to consider here when we talk about him is the Houston Astros are going to be a massively popular stack today. We have them projected to be the second most owned team on today's slate on DraftKings behind just the San Diego Padres. So a 14.1% ownership share for Houston on DK. Over on FanDuel, they're also going to be pretty popular. They're 10.4% ownership share. All that considered, I want to be underweight to the field on Houston. And just by that, it kind of makes sense to be on Carlos Hernandez a little bit.
Yeah, I expect to be a little bit under on Houston as well, just because they are projected for a little more ownership than they deserve. They're one of the best value stacks. They're a team that you should be utilizing hitters from in cash games for sure. And then also, as hitters in tournaments, it's fine as long as you're contrarian elsewhere, whether that's pitching or the stack you're pairing them with or whatever. The example I used this morning, you probably don't want to just run like a 5-man Padres with 3-man Astros stack in large field tournaments and think you're going to take down anything meaningful. But you do get really good value options with Michael Brantley hitting second at 3,300, Yordan Alvarez at 4,400. No idea why he's so cheap. Hernandez has done a good job this year of limiting power so far, but like you said, a lot of that was out of the bullpen, and also it's just a small sample. 138 expected ISO to lefties so far with a 28% strikeout percentage. Probably going to see a lower strikeout percentage going forward and more power, but who knows? Maybe he is just better than anyone really thinks. But point being, Yordan Alvarez way too talented to be 4,400. So individually, I don't mind mixing these guys in on lower owned teams, but I just don't really see myself using a whole lot of just full 5-man Houston stacks, especially in large field tournaments, because it's just going to be very difficult to differentiate away from that when you only have 5 other roster spots to do so.
Yeah, and then on the other side, Jayco Dorizzi, in terms of pitchers that I think aren't picking up ownership with some amount of safety, this isn't to say Odorizzi's good by any means, but I do consider him safer than a lot of these other cheap pitching options. His results this year have been below average for sure, 4.59 ERA, 4.8 expected ERA, but still, I don't think Odorizzi is a total trash can, and I think that's something where I look at his ownership at only 3.8% right now on DK, 8.4% chance to be a top 2 pitcher. He's somebody I'm going to be overweight to the field on with a little bit of confidence, at least relative to the other options. So Jayco Dorizzi is a tournament play. He's one of the guys I really do like to get to save salary with. I'm probably going to end up with somewhere around like 12 to 15% of them.
Yeah, especially this ownership. If ownership updates before lock and we're projecting Odorizzi for like 15 to 20%, then yeah, I'm just going to go away from him and I'll go to someone like Braxton Garrett or or other, pretty much anyone else. But it's just on slates like this, outside of the very obvious good pitchers on the slate, I kind of just want to be where the field isn't, because the range of outcomes for these guys is like identical, even if one projects, a little bit higher than others in terms of median projections. And Odorizzi, he hasn't been good this year. He has a 4.87 xFIP. He's allowed 1.8 home runs per 9, but he has struck out 21% of hitters, which is below average. But on this slate, it's not. There's not really a whole lot. There's not much. That not many guys have struck out more than 21 to 22%. And if you look at the Kansas City lineup, the only hitter in this lineup with an above average WRC plus against right-handed pitching since last year is Salvador Perez at 115. Everyone else is worse. The next highest in this lineup is Santana at 97, Merrifield's at 90, Dozier's at 87, Benintendi 87, Lopez 84. The point being, Jayco Dorizzi might be bad, but this Kansas City lineup's pretty bad also. It's just a matter of, which side's going to win out. And, honestly, your guess is as good as mine. But if Odorizzi is going to be 3% owned on a slate with just shitty pitching across the board, why wouldn't you take chances on him?
Yeah, and at least I feel better about Odorizzi than Braxton Garrett, and Garrett's projected for 3x the ownership. And Odorizzi, we have him projected higher. We have him with a better odds of being a top scoring pitcher, better chance of being a top value pitcher. So Jayco Dorizzi, I'd be more apt to maybe flip the ownership between him and Garrett and be underweight to Garrett, be overweight to Odorizzi. So at least in terms of these cheap guys, I'm going to be prioritizing Odorizzi a little bit in large field tournaments. I'm going to be fairly highly overweight to the field on him. Next game that we have here, it is the Minnesota Twins at home against the Cleveland Indians. And Griffin Jax has produced some very odd results lately. Here are his last 2 starts. Last time out against the White Sox, totally shut them down. Pitched 6 innings, struck out 10 hitters, walked just 1. His start before that against the Houston Astros, 0 strikeouts, 1 walk. So, Adam, which guy shows up today? The Griffin Jax who had 10 strikeouts or the one who had 0?
My guess is the bad one, just because I don't think his minor league numbers aren't really impressive. He, outside of that last start, really hasn't done anything impressive in the big leagues either. So I think the bad one. The only thing that concerns me a little bit, as far as someone that isn't expecting to get to Griffin Jax, he did throw his slider 48% of the time last start, and that coincided with 10 strikeouts. There's some non-zero chance, I guess, that he figured something out. I think it's pretty unlikely, though, based on his pedigree and everything we know about him. I'm still not really looking to go there.
Yeah, and then on the other side, I totally agree with you. Griffin Jax is most likely not going to end up in my player pool. I had 0% in the build that I made before we started the show. His numbers for the year, 5.45 ERA, 4.83 expected ERA, hasn't been generating strikeouts. You look at his Zips and Steamer projections, they project him to be a guy with a low strikeout rate and ERA over 5. So none of that is stuff that really interests me. But one thing that is concerning with me about stacking against him is that Cleveland themselves is a stack. They are looking like one of the more popular teams on the slate. Overall, Cleveland does not have a good offense. So 7.7% ownership share for them on DraftKings. That looks a little bit high. Over on FanDuel, Cleveland, we have with a 10.2% ownership. So one of the more over-owned offenses on the slate. How are you approaching them?
Similarly to what we were talking about with Houston, I think as far as value goes, Miles Straw leading off looks really good. Bradley Zimmer hitting fifth, Mercado hitting sixth. They're all just underpriced. And then you have Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes, who are just objectively good plays. I'm not saying, don't roster Cleveland, especially if you're playing a bunch of lineups. You should be. They're in a good spot against Griffin Jacks. They're likely to do well. You just need to be cognizant of who you're rostering them with. Probably don't want to go Houston plus Cleveland too often. Probably don't want to go Padres plus Cleveland too often. But if you're going, I don't know, Cincinnati was a stack we've talked about that's really low owned. If you're going Cincinnati, there's no real reason you can't mix in Jose Ramirez and Franmil Reyes with them, or Straw or whatever you need, because you've kind of already accomplished what you need to do with the Reds. And then if you're using, a Jayco Dorizzi or Carlos Hernandez or something, go ahead and fill it out with whatever hitters you want. But that's kind of the point, is you just need to be aware. You want to look at the ownership of your entire lineup and make sure that you have some path to success, that to winning a tournament that doesn't involve you basically having to win a coin flip against 2,500 different people.
Yeah, and then on the other side, even if I do think the Cleveland offense is going over-owned, oddly, Cal Quantrill picking up almost no ownership at the pitcher position, 8,500 on FanDuel. That's a non-consideration for me. Easy enough to just pay up for pitching and be different on FanDuel. But on DraftKings, Quantrill, I don't understand why he's only projected for 0.5% ownership. Given the overall outlook of pitchers on this slate, he's only 7,800. We need cheap pitchers to get to. 0.5% projected ownership with a 6.7% chance to be one of the top two scoring pitchers on the slate. Cal Quantrill was terrific 2 starts ago. It was against the Tigers, but 10 strikeouts, no walks. He returned to normal a little bit last start, but was still okay against the Oakland A's last time out. Pitched 6 innings, gave up 2 runs, had 5 strikeouts. Cal Quantrill is another guy who I'm putting in the boat with Matt Harvey, with Carlos Hernandez, Jayco Dorizzi. These are all guys who, for cheap and low ownership, I want to be, like 3x or so the field. And that's really where I'm going to be looking to differentiate my lineups. Cal Quantrill is another one of those guys.
Yeah, he's someone that I really don't even know how to talk about him, because for the season, he's only struck out 18.7% of hitters, 4.5 xFIP. He's done a good job limiting power, only 0.78 home runs per 9. He's kind of just a guy. But if you look at his recent starts, the strikeout number has ticked up. He's had a lot of success. Looking into his stuff and his underlying stuff, I don't really know where it's coming from. He started throwing a curveball on May 31st, and he's been throwing it ever since, but not really at high rates. And if you go back to May 31st, he still has an 18.8% strikeout percentage since then. So I don't think it's just the curveball turned him into a better pitcher. His release points, as far as I can tell, look about the same. His pitch types, excluding that curveball, he's throwing 6% of the time, look about the same. So I can't put my finger on why Cal Quantrill has just started striking guys out, but he has. So for one, there's some chance that he did improve something, and I just don't know what it is, and that's going to be good going forward. There's also just the chance that even if you assume this is the guy that we've seen over the course of the season that has an 18.5% strikeout percentage, he's still not really worse than most other pitchers on this slate. This is just a slate where that still makes him a viable pitcher. And, the Twins do have a 5.1 implied run total, but they also have plenty of strikeouts in this lineup. When you look at Rooker and then the bottom of the order, specifically Sano, Cave, and Jeffers, those guys all K a ton. The aggregate strikeout percentage is low because Simmons barely strikes out. Arias is really difficult to strike out. Donaldson, Polanco, Kepler are all relatively low strikeout guys, but there are a few guys, or 4 guys here, that are 30+%. So even if he just takes care of business against those guys, you're looking at getting 4 or 5 strikeouts if he can go 5 or 6 innings. So again, if you were getting a bunch of ownership, I would probably stay away. But if Quantrill's not going to get ownership, I think he's just as good as any pitcher on this slate that's not named Montas, Gausman, or Cole, basically.
Yeah, and once again, the 0.5% projected ownership, we're going to need salary savings at pitcher, because something that I think you're going to be on the same page with me as we talk about this next game here. We have a Coors Field game, which has a massive total, depending which book you look at, 12.5. Some books, it's gone all the way up to 13. I think I might have even seen a 13.5 run total. This is one of the highest run totals we've seen on a game the entire season. And we have the Padres going massively under-owned on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So we now have the Padres. This is pretty rare this happens at a Coors Field game. The Padres are the most positively leveraged stack on our tool on both sides. So DK, the Padres, 21.2% chance to be the top stack of the day and only a 15.8% ownership share. So it's not like they're not picking up any ownership, but it's not enough ownership as should be warranted given their projections. Over on FanDuel, 13% ownership share with a 21% chance to be the top stack of the day. So to me, the Padres are my number one stack on the slate. This is a team I'm prioritizing very highly. The reason that people aren't getting some enough is everybody wants to pay up for pitching. It's hard to stack the Padres and pay up for pitching. I wish we could do that because that would make DFS really simple, but we have the salary cap to worry about. But the Padres are going to be my most stacked offense for me today. Is it going to be the same for you?
Yeah, I expect it to be because like they're getting ownership and that does matter just in raw terms. But on a slate this size, it's just easy enough to balance that out by going to low owned pitching, which I have no issue doing on the slate, going to low owned bats elsewhere. It would be one thing if, they didn't have the highest chance of success by a wide margin. But right now we have them with more than double the top stack percentage of Houston, but they're getting 1.2 or 1.1x the ownership. Kind of the same thing with Colorado. Even comparing them to a team like the Dodgers, they're getting, 3.5 times they have 3.5 times the top stack percentage. They're getting 4 times the ownership. So a little bit over-owned, there relative to teams like that, but still, a 1 in 5 chance of being the top stack on the slate. And then the other thing I like about San Diego is you can actually take advantage of it. And again, this kind of sucks on one hand, but on DraftKings, Fernando Tatis and Jake Cronenworth are both shortstop only. So you can only roster one, which on the one hand, it's not good because you can't have the 1 and the 4 hitter in your stack together, but you're going to have Fernando Tatis just pulling massive amounts of ownership. And by definition, any lineup that has Tatis doesn't have Cronenworth. So clearly you're going to want some Padres stacks with Tatis because he's phenomenal, but you can just naturally have contrarian Padre stacks if you play Jake Cronenworth instead of Fernando Tatis. So that's one nice thing that, if you do happen to have a little bit more ownership elsewhere coming from your pitching or your second stack or whatever it is, if you just go Cronenworth over Tatis, you naturally have a contrarian Padres build.
Yeah, and I mean, we have, Tatis is projected for 34% ownership right now, 11.1% for Cronenworth. Then you get Manny Machado's 18.6% owned. Nobody else is really picking up a whole bunch of ownership here. We've got guys, just in the 12, 10, 11, 12% range. So the Padres, this is not nearly enough ownership for a matchup against Antonio Senzatella, who, maybe he's one of the better pitchers on the Rockies, but that's not really saying all that much. We've seen him struggle a lot at Coors Field over the course of his career because he's not a pitcher that's built to pitch in Coors Field. He doesn't generate swing and miss. He's a pitch to contact guy that just doesn't play well in Colorado. So I really like this spot for the Padres. As long as their ownership stays this low, I'm going to have them as probably one of the most highest percentage of stacks on any individual team all year. It's very rare that we have a team that's projected with a 21% chance to be the top scoring team that's going under-owned. A lot of times these spots, these teams at Coors Field with massive projections, they're projected to have 25, 26% ownership. That's not the case here with San Diego. So very high priority for me. And then on the other side of the game, Ryan Weathers is going to be on the mound for San Diego. He's most likely not going to work deep into the game because he's struggled to pitch deep into games. Number one, because he hasn't pitched all that well this year. Number two, he's also had a pretty quick hook with the Padres. So I'm willing to get to the Rockies, but they're not quite in the same ownership situation as the Padres. They're about appropriately owned. Yeah,
I think that they also, though, if you look at the ownership individually, Connor Joe is likely to get a ton of it. He's projected for 27%. Nobody else is projected for more than 18. And Trevor Story is just naturally going to be a little bit less owned than he otherwise would be in the spot. He would get a ton of ownership against Ryan Weathers if you didn't have Fernando Tatis at the same position. So it makes Story, I think, a really good tournament play. CJ Cron looks good. You can go to Diaz at catcher. Brendan Rodgers is fine. I still like the Rockies in tournaments, but I do think that, maybe just skipping over the best value play from the team in Connor Joe makes some sense.
Yeah, and that is something if you look at Colorado, who they do have a negative leverage score in our projections. But like you said, a lot of that comes because of Connor Joe. He's projected for 27.4% ownership. Nobody else in the lineup is projected for over 18%. So you could go to guys like Ryan McMahon, quality hitter, because if it's a lefty-lefty matchup, the field isn't getting to him. He has single-digit ownership. Charlie Blackmon, he also has single-digit ownership. I don't think that Ryan Weathers is going out and pitching 6-7 innings. At some point, McMahon and Blackmon are going to face right-handed pitching. This is also Coors Field. So both these guys as individual plays are guys that I want to be overweight to the field on. So no issue there. Connor Joe as a value hitter, though, I do think for DK purposes, he's a pretty high priority in cash games.
Yeah, for sure. You should. I haven't built a cash lineup, but I feel pretty comfortable saying you should have Joe, just like you should probably have Michael Brantley and Yordan Alvarez. But yeah, it's just Connor Joe is not actually a good hitter. he's the exact kind of guy that you should play in cash because he projects as a good value. But the guy's a career minor leaguer. He's 27 years old. He has like 154 major league plate appearances. He has a 92 WRC plus. And to be fair, Ryan Weathers also isn't a good major league pitcher. So Joe certainly could have success, but it's not like Tatis at 34%. Every lineup you don't have him in, there's a pretty good chance that you kind of just end up, you're screwed because it's Fernando Tatis. Connor Joe, if he actually has a game where he breaks the slate, you just got pretty unlucky.
Yeah, and 2,800 leading off at Coors Field. There's always merit to going there. I'm going to be rostering a little bit as a one-off, probably not quite as much as the field, though. Next game we have here on the slate, San Francisco Giants at home against the Mets. Kevin Gausman, I think, is the pretty clear number 2 overall pitching option just in terms of projections on the slate behind Garrett Cole. The question then becomes with Gausman is how much exposure do you want to get to him in relation to Cole?
So the way it looks for me right now, I think I would rather get more Cole at the expense of Gausman. And I really like Gausman. I think he's good. I'm glad to see him finally having success. I've lost so much money on this guy since 2015 or whenever I started playing. And it's a good park. The matchup's okay against the Mets. The concern I have, we have a little bit of concern on Cole where, exactly how deep is he going to go into the game? How long is his leash going to be? But on Gausman, I kind of think we have those same concerns, and he doesn't have quite the same strikeout numbers as Cole does. I don't like the matchup quite as much as I like Cole's. The thing with Gausman is that we have seen his walk rate elevate recently. He has a 12% walk percentage over his last 5 games. His strikeout percentage is at 27%, which is a little bit lower than for the entire season. I don't want to read too much into that, but it also has coincided with he hasn't thrown more than 91 pitches in any of his last 5 starts. He's gone less than 90 in 4 of those. He was pulled at 87 pitches after 5 innings last start. It kind of seems like they might be just, looking to get him out of games a little bit early at this point. And that's, certainly not great when you're talking about a pitcher at 10,100. So I think he's the second best pitcher on the slate in terms of talent. I think, he projects as the second best pitcher. No argument there. But whereas I think Cole looks a little bit better in terms of pay up guys, just because he does have the better matchup and the better strikeout stuff. And then I don't mind just kind of going to Frankie Montas, saving some money and going to that Toussaint Miley range and then, rolling the dice on these cheap guys that we've talked about. I think Gausman, the way it looks right now, I think it's probably Gausman and Toussaint as the ones that I come in a little bit underweight on, and then, getting a little bit more of Montas, maybe a little bit more of Cole, and then just being overweight on a lot of these really questionable pitchers.
Yeah, for sure. That's, I think, where I'm going to go. Garrett Cole, at least in the build I did before we started, I had him in a little more than half my lineups. And then just some of these guys who are really popular, like Touki Toussaint, Kevin Gausman. If I'm going to get to, 5 to 10% of pitchers who are 0.5% projected ownership, I'm just going to end up being underweight on a lot of really popular pitchers just because of that. And if I'm also going to a lot of cheap guys, I have the salary to spend up that makes it easier to get to Garrett Cole. So I'll see where I end up going with Gausman. I certainly don't want to stack the Mets against him. But I prefer Cole if I'm spending up for a pitcher. On the other side of this game, Rich Hill. The biggest issue I have with Hill, other than the fact that he hasn't pitched all that well this year, he's also a little bit of an elevated price today, 8,100 on DK. So I don't really know that I have a desire to play him. But on the other side, the Giants are also fairly popular. So I don't think it's a spot that I really want to have either side of.
Yeah, I don't really see much in the way of offense this year. Hill, we have with about a 7% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. He's getting virtually no ownership. So, you can go there if you want. It is a good park, but he's just not going deep enough in the games for me to really want to pay that salary. And it is a tough spot against the Giants, who are just a really, really good offensive team. The Giants, though, they have some value bats with Slater and Ruff. Posey's pretty cheap, but I think there's just better offenses that I'm going to get to before I get to the Giants. Better in terms of better matchups and parks, not better in terms of better hitters, because the Giants are pretty close to the top.
Yeah, I hate them, and I wish they would start losing games, but they but they never do. But yeah, it's really here that they're projected to have a decent amount of ownership, and there are teams that I just think have more upside for either similar or less ownership share. One of them is the Dodgers in the final game of the slate. The Dodgers offense, which is just so ridiculous from top to bottom right now. Team that's projected, they've come up a little bit in ownership since this morning, but still positive leverage, 5% ownership share, 6% chance to be a top stack on the slate. From top to bottom, this offense is so strong, and something that I mentioned this morning, I'm going to bring up again. Relative to his ownership, Cody Bellinger is one of my favorite one-off plays on the slate. He's underpriced today on both FanDuel and DraftKings. He's also projected for less than 1% ownership after a really slow start to the year. He started to make a lot better contact over the last couple of weeks. We saw him go on a stretch where he had 4 homers in 4 games. So Cody Bellinger, we don't have the Dodgers lineup yet, but assuming he's in, he's one of my favorite one-offs on the slate. And the Dodgers as a team, I'm going to look to get a little bit overweight to them against Steven Brault.
Yeah, right there with you. They right now are the 4th highest top stack percentage on the slate. They're not getting much ownership. And if you compare them to the 3 teams ahead of them, San Diego, Houston, Colorado, both or all 3 teams have a pretty sizable gap. Colorado and Houston are about 1.5 times as likely to be the top stack. Houston or San Diego is at like 3.5, but you're getting, about 18% ownership to San Diego, 14 to Houston, 12.5 to Colorado. And then you kind of fall off of a cliff with 4.5% aggregate ownership going to the Dodgers. Steven Brault's not a very good pitcher. He's not a total gas can, but this Dodgers lineup is really, really good. You might have Justin Turner back. You do have Trey Turner, most likely. You have Muncy, Seager. They both hit left-handed pitching. Will Smith's a really good catcher option. You mentioned Bellinger. I like that call too, because he has been hitting a lot better. Seems like he's getting healthy. And, 6 implied run total for the Dodgers. Relatively, or I guess a decent chance we don't have that starting lineup by lock, which drives down ownership as well. So I do really like the Dodgers here.
Have you seen anything official on who's going to be starting for the Dodgers today?
I haven't. There was an article saying that. So Dave Roberts basically said that they'd most likely call up a pitcher or two before today's game. He was asked about Andre Jackson. He said he was in consideration, but Andre Jackson also is the only, apparently, according to this article, the only healthy starter on the 40-man who they could call up. So assuming they're not doing a bunch of crazy stuff and calling up guys that aren't on the 40-man, it seems like it would be Andre Jackson coming up. And he's been good in the minors this year. He's starting. So he would make sense as someone that isn't going to completely tax the bullpen, whether they use him as a long guy or the actual starter, gives you 4 innings or something like that. He seems like a very good guess for who's going to be the guy.
Yeah. And I still haven't found anything official. I will address because Nightbot is just going crazy with the promos in the YouTube chat. The reason that Nightbot's going crazy is because we've got a lot of deals going on for starters. I'll pair these together. If you guys are into soccer DFS, or if you never tried soccer DFS, but it's something you have some interest in, the English Premier League is back. And if you use the promo code FREESOCCER, you can get 1 week free of Awesemo Plus soccer membership. So that is the promo code FREESOCCER. The other thing also, the NFL season is coming up. We have an NFL annual pass early bird special. If you use the promo code BLITZ, that is BLITZ, you'll get 25% off your Awesemo Plus NFL annual package. That is promo code BLITZ. So, Slackbot, there we go. I've shouted it out. You could stop reminding me. We've got all that in there, but I'm looking for Dodgers. Yeah, still nothing official here, but let's just say we don't get an official who's going to be the opener, who's going to be the long reliever, or maybe we find out that Graterol is going to be the opener and we don't know who the long reliever is. Is Jackson somebody that you'd still be willing to get to?
I think so. One thing to pay attention to is see if he gets called up, because as of right now, if you look at his minor league baseball page, he's not been recalled by the Dodgers. So if he's not called up, then I think it's pretty safe to say he's not pitching. But if they call him up, I think there's a decent chance he gets in this game. I really don't mind rolling the dice on him at 4K because his numbers aren't bad at all. Strikeout numbers have been good. Most of the season he's been at Double-A, but he has a 31% strikeout, 29.6% strikeout percentage at Double-A this year. He's, put up pretty good numbers there, 13 starts, 15 total games. If we get him as the long, confirmed as the long reliever, or just, expected to be the long reliever or whatever, I have no issues going to him because he has a good matchup against the Pirates. And the opportunity cost is just close to non-existent on this slate for SP2.
Yeah. And we look at Jackson. It's really just a price point play. His numbers in the minor leagues, like you said, he's not a well-regarded prospect, but still, he's young, he's cheap. Numbers overall, like you said, good strikeout numbers in Double-A this year, 3.27 ERA. So I'll keep an eye on that, and hopefully they'll have more information on that in Live Before Lock, which is coming up next right after us. So do us a favor, guys, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and don't go anywhere because MLB Live Before Lock is next.
welcome in. Good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you may be. If you're on the East Coast like myself, it's good evening. If you're on the West Coast like Eric Lindquist, who's made it back alive from Vegas, mind you, then good afternoon. Jordan is in the house producing the show, so make sure you say hello to him. And, man, we got a ton of stuff happening from betting you to Jock Market and some other great things like our free tools available to you today. But something tells me, and maybe this is just a theme, because the last time you and I worked together, I saw some stuff that I never thought I'd see on the Awesemo channel. And here you are, fresh off of your return from Vegas. And then as soon as I heard you talk, I'm like, damn, dude, you must have had a lot of fun.
How we doing, everybody? Let's go. Yeah, no, it was as good as it gets. Had my buddy's bachelor party out there. So we did some pool stuff. We did some gambling stuff. We did some sports book stuff. We did some, like, it was just a boys week. And we haven't had like a boys week for a year and a half, it feels like. So, I got to go to Miami with Ryan, with Rinpack himself, got to do that. I get to go to Denver here on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. I'm super stoked for the FanDuel live final there to go support him there as well. I'm just, the greatest plus one. It's going to really suck when he gets a girlfriend, but such is life right now. I get to be the plus one, but had an absolute blast in Vegas. My best friend's getting married here next month. And so as good as it gets, but yes, a couple drinks were had, and it might be affecting this just a tiny bit today.
Well, did you just roll in like 10 minutes ago? Is this like...
It feels like it. No, we drove back yesterday afternoon, and let me tell you, that drive from Vegas to Los Angeles in traffic, it is as absurd as it gets. But it could not have been a better weekend. I think we appropriately covered enough Vegas time for the next 10 years.
There you go. Did you golf? Yeah. And this is the old man in me asking this question.
We had 2 tee times, and
we didn't make either one.
We didn't make either one. Yep. 7 a.m. We ended up, let's see, the first night it ended up being like 5:30 a.m. And we're like, nice. do we just go to the range? We got to Uber over to the range and start up. And we're like, what? Let's call it. Let's play. Saturday was like the really nice course we were going to play at. And missed that one too. So go team.
Amazing. That is proof positive that you maximized your time out there in Vegas, which is what we try to do here tonight, right? I can really see the chat.
It was the Hangover 4 movie. That's what it was. It was the Hangover 4. We screwed up.
Oh my goodness. The chat is putting you in Vegas with Hunter Biden, with strippers. I mean, everywhere across the board.
Sorry about it. What are you going to do about it? It was as good as it gets. Plus, it doesn't change any of the information. Maybe it changes a little bit about how I relay it today, because I don't know. I feel like I've got like a wedge stuck in my throat. But other than that, we're all chill. These are good times.
Not a lob wedge. Times. You didn't use any of that over.
No, I literally zero lob wedges. I was so excited too, because like at my bachelor party, we only got to play like 9 holes because both days it stormed. And we had like a bunch of bad weather in the Midwest. So it was like, all right, well, at least my other buddy, he's like, best golfer I know. It's like, we decided to go on out there and oops.
All right. We got 10 games to look at. We have to tell everybody first and foremost, though, about what Matt and Ben are doing with betting you. So you want to be fully prepared for the college football season. Week 0 is right around the corner, a week from this coming weekend, week 0. So you want to make sure you're good to go with everything that Ben and Matt have for you. Betting you every Wednesday on Spotify, Apple, and beyond, wherever you get your podcast. So make sure you download, subscribe, and you're liking everything we'll do. We'll tell you all about Jock Market, our sponsor today, coming up in a little bit, as well as our free tools that you should be taking full advantage of today. So let's jump into it, man. And you mentioned as far as the information doesn't change, maybe just a little bit as far as how you relay it. All your lineups are in, right?
Yes.
Like that's not.
I'm going to have to adjust them whenever we get this Dodgers lineup. That's San Francisco lineup. We have a lot of lineups that are still to come in. That's what we got our guy News God in the chat doing. He's going to be keeping us apprised of all the things that we need in our lives. But all the early game stuff, I'll be able to make the adjustments based on what the lines come out. But I just wanted to be prepared to help everybody here. Going a little bit lighter today because I don't know, my head hurts. There's that.
There you go.
Yeah.
We could talk about the go-to cure for a hangover, depending on your vice. So what's the overall feel tonight? It doesn't seem like even with our own tools that we'll have, our top stacks tool, our top pitchers tool, which is free for you to use. So everything Eric is saying, especially pitcher related, you should be already on our top pitchers tool for DraftKings, FanDuel, Yahoo as well. How do you even look at this? It seems like there's probably going to be, or maybe I'll guess, a little more flexibility with pitchers than stacks in this 10-game slate tonight. I know the opposite. That the look I'm getting is
the word
flexibility.
The word flexibility makes it sound like, oh, there's good plays on the bottom end, and I think that would be a misnomer. I think that would be the incorrect way of looking at it. What I will say is that if you're not going to the top end of pitching, that you have to be willing to inherit a ton of risk, especially a lot of people on our chat. Just from what I know, a lot of people hitting me up on Twitter and Slack chat. Everybody's playing like the $5, the $3. They're playing 20 max stuff. They're playing the 150 max stuff that's like on the cheaper end, or maybe, we get a couple questions once in a while, 888, one lineup. And it's like, all right, we can fire some of that stuff up. But for the most part, it's a lot of people playing the 20 max stuff. And so when you're competing with 10,000 entries in an MLB slate, 10 gamer like this, and you have clear cut pitching options at the top, you just have to take the field. And I think the top 2 pitcher percentage does a really good job of kind of encapsulating exactly what we're dealing with. Like Garrett Cole is near 50% ownership, and he does not end up optimal 50% of the time. Kevin Gausman, 27% of the time, he's coming in ownership 35, 36% of the time. And I think outside of those two, and then Touki Toussaint because of matchup, and I mean, I'm just obsessed with this dude, especially. I like a lot of the changes he's made. I don't expect his strikeout rate to be what it was before, as I've kind of been digging in on him. I mean, he's just getting no swings and misses on this new, like this sinker, this deal that he's kind of introduced in order to just get the ball in the zone, get ahead in counts, and then activate a lot of what he's doing with his breaking stuff, where he does get north of 40% whiff rates on everything there. That's kind of the key to success for him. Against Miami, anybody can do that. And so I think, of course, he's in a good spot here too. But I think just outside of that key grouping of those 3 guys that I feel confident in, everything else is a crapshoot. But so many times, if you're going to scattershot on this bottom end, I mean, we are seeing nobody underneath Cal Quantrill other than Justin Steele, who's kind of become the de facto, let's punt with him at 5,400 guy. Everybody else on the top 2 pitcher tool is coming in around 1% or underneath 1%, should I say. So we want to be scattershotting. This is the time in a $5. If you want to actually win that damn thing, you need to be willing to inherit the risk in this spot, because it sets up too well not to. And so that's probably the right way. So I won't say that it's flexible. I will say that it is inherently risky, but you should, if trying to win more in the long run, be willing to inherit that risk.
So where I'm really curious to kind of start, and we're going to talk about Cole and Gausman, and you mentioned Toussaint as well. Wade Miley, I'm sure, is going to get a mention here, just being in that top double-digit group for our top pitchers tool, top 2 on DraftKings. We'll touch on FanDuel in a second, Eric. But where I'm really curious is Frankie Montas, simply because of the numbers. Here's a guy whose salary is going to be wedged in between the top 2 and really the bottom 2 of that tier, but also from ownership standpoint, he's the only guy that actually has some leverage with where he's projected on our top stacks tool to the ownership. Everybody else, including Garrett Cole at 43, is over-owned except for Montas. So is there any workability? Notice I said workability, not flexibility. Is there any workability with Montas?
See, for me, it just comes down to, I would much rather just kind of be taking the field. I would much rather kind of find a way to get down to those guys who are even lower owned because of the stacks, the under-owned stacks, specifically San Diego at the top end of the board, the Dodgers, who are coming in around 2.2% for like a top 3 offense in baseball. And I mean, one of the best lineups you could possibly imagine, depending on how they roll it out. It is really hot and humid here too in Los Angeles today. I'm just throwing that out there. It's not enjoyable. Jordan Klein, can I get a hell yeah? Yes. Nope.
He's not hungover a day and a half.
No, he lives at the marina. He's a joke. He's not even real life. He's fancy. He's fancy like that. Yeah, got the head nod. He's a fancy kid. Yeah, no. Fanciful. He keeps his pinky up in the air and drinks the rosé and sits on his balcony and laughs at me. But it's fine. I love the Valley. Either way, I think that finding a way to just go even cheaper, get off of even that kind of ownership. Like Frankie Montas, you're right. He's the one guy who's coming in flat, 23%, 24% over here on DK as top pitcher percent. Like it's still a tiny bit overowned. And so you're looking at a quarter of the field going there. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have shares of these guys. I'm just saying that I would much rather just be over or underweight on just about everybody on that top end, except for, and I want to put the caveat on this, Garrett Cole I'm talking about him specifically. He just has the upside to mow you down and ruin your life. And so we don't want to completely be fading guys who can mow you down and ruin your life. We're not interested in that, but you combine him with the likes of Cal Quantrill, Carlos Hernandez. I have 20% of, and I'm really about to cry about it. It's not great. Matt Harvey. I think I was in chat earlier being like, is this a thing? I was kind of like testing the water, feeling out where Adam and Greg were coming in, and then they gave me the go ahead, and I was like, hell yeah, let's party with that. So I'm ready to rock. And I just think it's finding ways to get on some of these riskier pitchers, be able to afford some of these bats that can really, really go off, because it's hard to find slates where you're going to get this kind of under-owned team because of just the way that the roster construction, everybody wants to pay up for pitching. They're going to pay down for Houston bats and move on with their day. Let me do the opposite.
Well, I do have a little bit of bad news here. Our guy, Jake, Mr. NHL for Awesemo, awesemo.com, has already declared that he will win the 100K tonight. So it's all about second place, Eric.
Probably will. He's a jerk. He's handsome. He's from Minnesota. He's my brethren. And he's an asshole who wins every NHL contest. You would not believe the amount of hits this dude had. For me, I actually took down the FanDuel the first night. So I got to say, Jake, thank you for letting me jump in your NHL streets once or twice during the course of NBA season. Anytime there was like a little lull, and especially like you want to be playing the beginning slates of pretty much every sport. It's, I'm not an NHL expert by any means, far from it. It's the one sport I probably track the least, even though, I'm from the North and from hockey land, basically. Just never was my thing. But it's one of the best DFS sports. And so he's the head of that. So the guy jumps in our MLB streets and just wrecks havoc too. So I'll take second. I think second's a nice chunk of change. So I'll take
25K.
Yeah, you know what? That seems it could be worse. Could be worse.
You could do some damage back in Vegas with that 25K.
Yeah, I might get in the car again and really go ruin my life. Awesemo might not like that very much.
Who's a pitcher not in a double-digit top 2 percentage that you're going to go to the most across your lineups? 100, 250, 300, however many you're building tonight. Let's take everybody from Wade Miley. As you can see, Jordan has it up. The top pitcher stacks or tools, pardon me, is free for you. Let's take everybody from Wade Miley up off the board. Who are you going to the most as far as your P1, or even if it's majority P2 in this, that's fine. But what pitcher are you getting the most exposure to?
I like that you were able to stall that because I knocked the head jack out of my headphones because I'm an absolute mess of a human being.
You really are, man.
And you crushed it there. And I've got Mike Campbell saying I'm not a golf expert. Shut up. Just stop it. We've been going
Doesn't
back and
matter.
forth. He seems like a good
wrench.
dude, but also shut up. We're
right.
I could, if you want to play golf, if you want to send a head-to-head, let's party, my guy. But yeah, I'm very, very excited about getting to a lot of these dudes. So it's not so much that I'm like, I say that I'm looking at my lineups right now, 22% Matt Harvey, 21% Carlos Hernandez. So I would have to kind of start with the conversation there. Carlos Hernandez is not a very good real life pitcher, but when it comes to K stuff on this slate, a guy who can get some swings and misses, 26.2% is really hard to find on this bottom end. And, it hasn't really matched up with a ton of success, but I just think that he's at a price point where I can get to more San Diego, more Los Angeles. A lot of these top end stacks, New York is pretty much at flat, and New York should not be at flat with some of the top end pieces of that lineup. A lot of 2 and 3 mans between Stanton, between Judge, a lot of the guys that I really like there. Colorado, even if you wanted to sprinkle them in, just because such a high implied total, I'd rather go to like chalkier Colorado than chalkier Houston for sure. I just think there's more potential in a Coors Field game going up against Ryan Weathers where that can still really be a thing that happens. 92 degrees there today. I mean, it's as good of a hitting environment. And so finding some of those upper echelon bats, finding ways to it with a guy with like Carlos Hernandez, who if he's on, will mow down dudes. Like he will find a way to be mowing them down. We've seen it time and time again where, again, he's not a good real life pitcher, but he's stretched out 93 and 96 pitches. 3 of his last 4, he's gone for more than 15 DK points, 22.9, 22.5. At his ownership, he's one of the more egregiously owned guys on that bottom end. It's hard to find that kind of K potential. And yes, Houston, the real appeal is that they're going to be popular, and I just am not going to be on them. So I really want to like double my leverage and play some more Hernandez. And, if they do fail or if they go off, yeah, I'm going to have a dead day, and that's fine. But I just think that he provides a lot of leverage here on this slate as well. And Cal Quantrill. So I don't really know what to do with this dude. Adam and I have talked about him a lot, 7,800, but my Minnesota Twins are just not a very good baseball team. They're just, it's not a good lineup. You're taking Mitch Garver out of that lineup. Miguel Sano's still there in the 6th hole. He's like a free strikeout 2 out of 3 times that you're seeing him. Outside of Araz and Polanco, I mean, Donaldson has not been Donaldson here specifically of late. I mean, it's just been a grind. We finally saw him like do something there last time out, but I mean, 9 of his last 10, it's just been abysmal. Just looking at what he's been doing here this season, all the way down to 3,400. I think I'll be overweight to Twins, but I'm going to definitely be way overweight on Cal Quantrill.
Yeah, I agree. Quantrill, definitely with that matchup. I mean, my goodness, I understand Griffin Jax comes in and is not going to mow down guys left and right by any means, but that total, you also mentioned the lineup adjustment. That total is so, it was at 10 earlier today in PA. I mean, my goodness, if that's not overreactionary to what we saw really from both teams putting up a ton of runs recently, I think this is a great game in which, even if it's not looked at coming in because of both teams putting up a bunch of runs over the weekend, this is where I think you are going to get more of a pitcher less hitting matchup. And it's going to kind of go in the face of Quantrill as well, because he's been lit up in his 4 times out against Minnesota. But I just think this is more of a regression to the mean as opposed to what we saw over the last 3 days being a representation of both offenses, including your Twins.
Yeah. So if we get in a habit of looking like 2 or 3 starts for a pitcher and being like, oh, well, you got murdered by them last time. It's such a small sample. And again, we talk about sample size. Like in the NFL, you're not allowed much of a sample size. You get 17 games. In baseball, we get 162. A starting pitcher is seeing, north of 15 starts in a year, 20 starts. It's an opportunity to really kind of dig into what they're doing. And I want to look at the sum of the parts rather than the parts. And looking at individual games against a team, that's the parts. And so we don't want to get in a crazy habit of doing it. Sure, some teams maybe see a certain guy, they might find a trend that they can really kind of cling to, or maybe there's, a lot of guys you can hit the ball, and loft it in the air and it's a fly ball pitcher and it just sets up that way. Like it could be something like that. But on the whole, you just look at this Minnesota team. I mean, it's an implied total near 5 in the last run. It's 5.1 here at the moment. It's 84 degrees there in target field, wind blowing out to left, but we've seen some improved outings out of Cal Quantrill. I don't know what to make of it. Adam was just talking on the last show. He doesn't know what to make of it right now, but 2.86 ERA, 1.17 whip. Why is he under 1% owned? That makes no sense to me. 7,800. It's kind of a dead zone with pitching, like that whole 7K range. So getting overweight, you play 5% of each of those dudes, you're probably doing it right on this slate, like minimum 5% of them.
More people popping in. Quick reminder here to hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel as well, the notification bell, so you're not straggling late, even if it's just 20 minutes late. And reminder, you do the same with the Awesemo Odds channel, the Awesemo Fantasy Football channel. 2 new channels for you to like and be subscribed to as well. And make sure you hit that bell so you're not missing anything. Just hit the link in the chat and subscribe to our 2 new channels. So I'm curious now, going to FanDuel on the pitcher element of it, and I'll stall as you bring everything up here, E. I'm curious because it's a little more muddled, if you will. Is that a word? Muddled or muddied?
Muddled.
Okay.
Let's judges. Yeah, somebody's going to just correct. Like post in they're going to go doing what I did and type in muddled. Here we go. Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. In a state of bewildered or bewildering confusion or disorder. There you are. You didn't even know how smart you were.
Exactly right. Every now and again, I surprise even myself. It's a little less clear, if you will, because look, even Toussaint, who is everybody's on him, 30% of the field is rolling with him. We've got 3 guys on our free tool today, the top pitchers on FanDuel specifically. We've got 3 guys who are predicted to be the top pitcher higher than him. But look, even Garrett Cole is not double where Toussaint is, barely under double where Toussaint is. So it might be a little more difficult here to kind of navigate who that top pitcher is, because ownership or leverage isn't really speaking to us to kind of dictate.
On FanDuel specifically.
FanDuel.
Yeah. So the question of the day is Tukey on FanDuel. What are you doing with him? He's 30% owned. That's like the pitcher spot. You fade him, you basically have leverage on every other pitcher. Yep. Like it's so hard. And again, it's a misprice. 7,900 for him in this spot. he's been much improved here since getting back here. I mean, he had such an abysmal 2020, just not walking dudes as much. And so against Miami, it didn't matter. It wouldn't matter if he was playing Miami or any matchup. If he's going to go out and walk dudes, you're going to be in a lot of trouble rostering Tukey, which makes me on FanDuel specifically feel like just kind of be lower, hit eject a little bit. It's been rougher the last 3 starts, but he came out of the gate strong against San Diego and Philly. We have now 5 starts here. Hasn't really gone nuts other than his 10 Ks against Philly, your Philadelphia Phillies, underneath 5 Ks in 4 of 5. So I don't think we're fading a ton of crazy K upside. And I'm telling you, just I think because he's throwing that pitch so much, I don't see the Ks getting out of control. Now, this is Miami, so they might be the outlier. But at 30% ownership with a top stack potential underneath 10, I just think you full fade and live your like. I hate telling people what to do with their money because like this is what I would do if I were playing more on FanDuel. I have like 3 lineups over there. Just full fade him and take the field. Like you have leverage with just about every pitcher. Garrett Cole, 15%, 16.4% ownership there. Kevin Gausman, 10.5, 11.9. Like you're getting 2 phenomenal pitchers that, 10-3 and 11-4 are expensive. Those are hefty, but in tournaments, they have more upside. They're more willing to go 6 innings as well. I mean, Tukey, the other part too, a guy who's going to be walking people, if he is like having that issue coming in here, again, he's had 2 walks in at least 4 or 5 as well. It's something that will continue to happen for him here. And if he's not locating there, if the Ks aren't there, there's just not a lot of outs that exist for Tukey at that ownership. Whereas you're getting leverage everywhere else. Give me the field. Just scatter shot the field the same way we talked about on DK. And I think for me, Carlos Hernandez, definitely not the play over on FanDuel comparatively to DK, where you're playing 2 pitchers. Like for me, against Houston, I understand Houston's still going to be a popular stack there, but I would just rather go to other dudes in that spot because those top tier pitchers, they only have a 10.5% top pitcher percentage, but at flat ownership, give me their upside.
All right, before we switch to the bats, and this is DraftKings, this is FanDuel, this is kind of a bigger picture here because they're going to be worked differently depending on which site. But 2 guys that we didn't spend much time really at all on that I'm curious just your thoughts, if it's maybe you're not getting to as much, or maybe there's a hard fade, or maybe this is just a sneak play that you didn't want to give Jake and anybody else out there to win the first prize 100K. But Miley and Odorizzi. These 2 guys and the approach of 2. We'll start with DraftKings and kind of if you have thoughts on FanDuel as well. But looking at both Miley and Odorizzi, there's going to be a little bit of a difference as far as price is concerned. But both guys are pretty significantly projected to be higher pitchers than just, the Keuchels and Harveys of the world.
So Odorizzi is probably my favorite. So if we're looking over at the MLB prop tool strikeouts right now, that's still going free right now. The MLB player props tool is just ridiculous. And Jayco Dorizzi right now has a 16% expected ROI on him. One of the highest expected win percentages on his 3.5 strikeout prop, 66% there. I love going up against Kansas City with righties. I mean, Jayco Dorizzi, a fly ball pitcher, not a ton of K upside. I don't think 21.1% is going to be something that's going to really jump out to anybody in a meaningful way. But you take Jorge Soler out of that lineup, I mean, it just becomes so much more watered down. I mean, Whit Merrifield, Nicky Lopez has been batting second with his 300 expected slugging, and then Sal Perez, you start, running into a really good bat, but 26.5% K percentage. And the back half of this lineup is complete dog, 27.7% K percentage. Michael A. Taylor, Hunter Dozier, 28.3% K percentage. There's K opportunity here for him. Kansas City just so bad up against righties. I really do like getting to a little bit of Jayco Dorizzi on both sites. I think that he's a guy that I have 11% of him right now. What is his top pitcher percentage right now? Near 5%, only 2.1% ownership over on FanDuel. I think that there is an opportunity for 6 Ks, 6 innings, getting that quality start bonus, moving on with your day there on a 2-pitcher site. No problem getting over the field on that too. It's just such a bad lineup. It's a very bad baseball team. And there's Ks that kind of exist, starting with Sal Perez and going down the rest of that lineup. There's opportunity for Jayco Dorizzi to be much better than people expect here. Wade Miley, I don't even know how to analyze the guy because I never play him. He doesn't strike out anybody. He just never strikes out anybody whatsoever. 18.5% K percentage. Again, just give me the lower end. I'll inherit all the risk in large field tournaments.
All right, we move on to the other side here. It looks like San Fran lineup. has been confirmed. So more will pop in, right? And that will now have Eric's head explode as he races to fix and crunch anything that he... Look, we only have 33 more minutes until it locks. And as much as everybody would like to see your reaction at 6:59 of you not getting your lineups in, I feel too bad for you to have to go through that again.
Eytan, why? Just why? I like you. You and I are friends. Like,
well,
I like you as a person. That's not very nice.
It's not. But if you know / like me as a person, you know that I'm an asshole and I can't even help it. I'm sorry.
You are. You're an endearing
preemptively
asshole. But there's that. Thank you so much, everybody, for always being there for me. I have realized that, you know, one of the strange qualities I have in my life is people like to watch me be upset more than they like to watch me be like regular, which is a strange thing to... I don't know why that's entertaining, but here we are.
Look, Andy Kaufman made an entire career out of realizing that people would rather hate and feel awkward. Like, you had one of the best Kaufman-esque moments, with the help of Jordan, of course, on the last show. People were tweeting you thinking you were going to like punch Jordan in the head. They were so mad. Like, that is a level of theater that is tough to accomplish, my friend.
Well, I appreciate that, you know. We all reached the pinnacle of our careers at one point or another. Mine was just fake abusing Jordan Klein through the internet, through the power of Zoom. You know, we all have our callings in life, and apparently that's mine.
At least you found it out early in life. A lot of people waste years looking around. Now, it's not often when we talk about our stacks tool that we have a team like San Diego in Colorado. That is super. I'm almost thinking to myself, like, are people not taking advantage of our top stacks tool, $29.95 a week for Awesemo Plus, where you get everything across the board? Because while we have them projected as the top stack by a mile, they're barely over-owned by Colorado and then Houston kind of in the middle. But usually, my point of this, Eric, is usually when we see a team, a competent team in Coors Field, not only are they super high as far as the top stack, but the ownership usually follows. So A, is San Diego now an even more appealing team because they have the best leverage on the board? And B, what is the result? Why do you think they're underowned?
So the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And the greatest trick that the DFS industry ever taught anybody was that security is a good thing. Like, security is security, but it gives up so much ownership. Like, you're just, it is what it is. And so when you see a team like this on the top end that is in Coors Field, 7 implied run total, and they're coming in underowned, this is like just a jam spot. It's just it's a jam spot. And I'm willing to, with 20 games out here, in a top stack potential, it's so shocking to me that this is the case, that people are going to want to go to cheap bats plus Garrett Cole plus Kevin Gausman over just going to San Diego and inheriting risk at the pitcher spots. Like, it blows my mind. It truly makes no sense to me whatsoever. So I just want to, more than anything, yes, I was quoting the usual suspects. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course.
Like, what the hell? Kaiser Sose.
I mean, Chaz dropping the mug is one of the most iconic. Right. Leslie Nielsen even parodied that in one of the Naked Gun movies, I think. Like, that's an iconic scene, just dropping the mug, to the point when you said the greatest trick ever played.
I've got a bulletin board right here too, which is the best. Like, I could do the whole thing. I can't do like the foot scene. Whoever decided, hey, we're gonna shoot the feet and then we're gonna do the walk, like that. For me, that was the moment. Like, for me, that's one of the greatest moments in cinematic history, was just the walk, which is such a weird thing. But anyway, back to the baseball aspect of it. San Diego, absolutely love them. And I just think that this is one of the better spots you're going to find the entire season in large field stuff, to just be over on a team. And of course, you don't want to necessarily, like, they're still the highest owned team on the slate. It's just that their ability to go off in this spot is higher than you're going to find on just about any team the rest of the year. I know Greg on the last show, great to have him back. I just absolutely loved just the way that he put that, where he's like, you just kind of have to play them, and it makes no sense that this would be the case, and you just need to be there. And I really do agree with that, where you can't find this kind of a total every single day. You're just not going to run into a 13 total in a game very often in DFS over the course of a season. And so you got to kind of read it a little bit differently. I think What makes it really hard on DraftKings is you can't play Cronenworth. You can't play and Tatis in the same lineup. You've got to break them up. They're both shortstop only. If you go to FanDuel, you have the opportunity to do whatever you want anytime because you have a utility spot. But we're still living in the past here on DK in terms of lineup construction. But I think it makes it a very fun game theory aspect. Just flip-flop the two. I have the ownership of Tatis on Cronenworth. I have the ownership of Cronenworth on Tatis. I think that that's the right way to do it. Of course, Tatis is the better hitter. If you want to play cash, make room for him, fire it up. But San Diego, there's not a whole lot else to say other than you can play them in any format you want.
And they're not even the most expensive stack, right? It's not even like you're spending up exponentially. The Dodgers, right? Atlanta, we know, even Oakland, it's going to be a little more expensive there. So it doesn't add up. Houston, I get where if you're going to go Garrett Cole and if you're going to go at the top there and pay up, you're going to have a cheap stack available to you. But I just want to marry, if we can, what we talked about in the first half to where we just opened up with San Diego. Let's assume, and again, in the backdrop of this is that they're not even the most expensive stack, but let's assume you're paying up for the San Diego stack, first and foremost, the 5-man stack on DK. Is it Odorizzi and Hernandez that you may be rostering, or are you still going to go Odorizzi as your P2? And maybe that's the break, is that you're not going too expensive pitchers, but you can still balance like a Cole and an Odorizzi with a San Diego stack.
Well, what's interesting about it is if you get up to Cole, you're probably going to have an even more different lineup construction just for that overall. Like you're going to have more ownership in your lineup, but it's going to be very hard for people to fit 5 San Diego with Garrett Cole. I'm right now. It's actually okay. It's not that difficult. You just basically are playing a super cheapie of the Matt Harvey nature, the one that I'm kind of clicking around with right now in my 3-max.
Wait,
stuff.
Matt Harvey, are you just using that as an example? Or are you specifically pushing people to roster Matt Harvey?
Oh, I talked about him a little bit here. I think this Tampa Bay lineup is complete Garbaggio. Yeah. You get no Cruz, you get a Rosarena out of there. Matt Harvey, I said I have 21% of it, and I'm going to move on with that. I now have 23%. That's exciting because I'm kind of tweaking through stuff. So I got 2% more. I just want to give full disclosure.
The level of bragging rights you would have if Matt Harvey breaks the slate. Not only did you win money, but you called it on the show.
Yeah, I think he's going to come in a little bit higher owned now because people see that lineup. No Nelson Cruz. No Randy Arena, no Randy Rosarena. I don't know why I can't say that. I probably can't say a lot of words right now, but Brennan Lau, G-Man Choi, Manuel Margot. Manuel Margot in the 3-hole there is kind of where it starts to get interesting. Mike Brousseau, who has power and he strikes out a lot. Brett Phillips, Kevin Kiermaier, Francisco Mejia, whole back end of this in Tampa Bay. It's a great ballpark. And, as opposed to Matt Harvey pitching in Baltimore, he's going into Tampa. I think that there's an opportunity. I'm not saying that he's going to break the slate by any means. I just think at his price point, I think that there's some viability to getting way down to that bottom end. And I can play Cole and Harvey together in lineups. Like it's something that I'm doing right now. I'm looking at this exact lineup. It starts Tatis and it goes 5 through 8 San Diego on DK, and I have 3,200 left per person. I think that's a really fun lineup to go to. I think everybody on San Diego is viable. Absolutely everybody. If you want to make that Cronenworth, you have even more to play with. You can kind of combine them with some of the cheaper stacks, some 2 and 3 mans. I have some interest in even going down to Pittsburgh. I mean, Pittsburgh right now, only a 1.7 right now top stack potential. We don't even know the starting pitchers for the Dodgers, and sure, they have a solid bullpen. But again, it is really hot out here right now. And there's one quality major league hitter for sure that I'm way, 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 way over the field today in Brian Reynolds. And I think you should be too.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation once we find out what's going on in LA. You've got 2 pitchers, even if it's somebody that you mentioned is coming out early, whatever the scenario may be, those 2 stacks in Pittsburgh all of a sudden comes into play here. I did see a question I wanted to get your thoughts on chat. Everyone hates Chris asking if, let's see now, EMac is populating this. Let me go back here. Everyone
EMac
hates
2024. Let's go.
On the late slate, is it okay to match Gausman with whoever the Dodgers starting pitcher is?
Say that again.
Is it okay to match Gausman with whoever the Dodgers starting pitcher is?
Yeah, I would have no problem with that. I mean, as long as it's Austin Jackson, I mean, it needs to be Austin Jackson. I don't know who else. Let me pull this up. So the way, where is this? Again, I live in LA. I should be able to be better at pulling this up than I am. Andre Jackson, excuse me. So Andre Jackson's the guy right now that I have in. I don't like the wording for Dave Roberts saying he's in the equation is what I'm looking at here. He's in the equation to fill starting duties, but he's also 4K. There's a lot of viability to playing anybody who can pitch 4 innings, like having any ability to pitch 4+ innings, 75 pitches, 65 pitches, even at 4K. Make that kind of somebody to click on. Also, it's really nice that DraftKings does not currently have him in the pool. He's not in the projected pool. So you're going to get him at 1%. You're just flat out going to get this dude at 1% no matter what happens. It's impossible to imagine that he gets up over that whatsoever. And Pittsburgh, outside of, Ryan Reynolds, as I'm saying, and again, it's a bullpen game. Dodgers have a great bullpen, but it's wind blowing out slightly. 3.7 implied total. That's higher than you normally see for the Pirates. They're a garbage team. We're at home facing any good pitcher. They're around 3.3 even. There's just a couple guys here. Ben Gamel's 2K. Brian Reynolds 3.3K is one of my favorite tournament plays here of the entire day. In the 3-hole, Colin Moran just went double dong on the world. Like, not saying that he's going to do that again, but I think that there's some viability to, 2 or 3 hitters from this team at the same time that I think you should be over the field on, as long as it's Andre Jackson, like a guy who has the opportunity to pitch more than 3 innings. Whereas I don't see anybody else really here. I'm looking. Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else that can really go a bulk of the innings here for the Dodgers. So do you see Andre Jackson starting? And I'm hoping it doesn't come into well after lock here. Right now I have 6% of him. I think I just talked myself into bumping him up a little bit.
By the way, the chat is mixed. I would say probably at best on your Harvey play. It's hard to tell with all the emojis out there, but I think that you're getting mixed reaction with your move to roster Harvey. Just so you know.
No, I'm a sick individual. I just got done doing sick individual. Exist, like you come out back from Vegas, you're just like, I just want to gamble. It's just that, I guess. So we're gonna do that. Sorry about that, Jordan. But he didn't like that.
We need like it's like a live after lock show where it's just you recapping what you did in Vegas. That it's like live after Vegas, where you're on the drive. I assume you're driving home. Yeah, you can't talk. You're all banged up. You look worse than like Benicio del Toro and what was the movie with him and Johnny Depp, right? Where he's just all banged
the
up.
Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. I got you.
Yes,
I got you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
all right.
I'm fringing on that for sure.
So before I wanted to just follow up on maybe where we could take advantage. You mentioned Pittsburgh and see if there's other examples like that kind of at the bottom of what we have projected, but taking advantage of going against a heavily owned pitcher. But first, Jock Market is always the change and revolutionary approach that they have as far as turning DFS into a stock market. That's why we always tell you about the great things going on at Jock Market. You use the pregame IPO, you pick a bunch of players, whatever's going on here in baseball. Eric mentioned he's the hockey honk here. And when the NHL comes back, golf is happening now. Whatever you may need to get and take advantage of, well, that's why we have a promo code for you as well. Use our promo code Awesemo for up to a $50 deposit bonus. And the beauty of Jock Market is that you can sell, you can buy everything happening in game like a stock. And you're not just sitting there like another lineup at another place thinking, all right, I'm screwed. I'm SOL because I rostered a guy who just isn't having it tonight. Or, man, I could really cash out. That's kind of the beauty of it. So what I'm curious about is looking at kind of the bottom of what we have as some top stacks, but seeing if there's any type of just taking advantage of maybe a super owned field. So initially what I would think of is you mentioned concerns that you'd have with Tucson. Well, he's heavily owned on both sites. So normally I don't know how appealing the Miami stack would even be, but if you're trying to fade the field, like that's a 1-2 punch right there, where if you're not rostering Tucson as a top 2 pitcher and you're rostering Miami and Tucson shits the bed, you might win some money tonight.
I don't know if I can go and roster Miami. Like there's those, I think they're, yes and no. I don't want to go out of my way to, I mean, they have the lowest top stack potential. For me, it just comes down to, he can start walking against anybody, and sure, the line could get moving, and there's that opportunity. I think we were on the show together where I just flat out called how much 2K I was going to have. He ended up being way higher owned than I thought, even at like 10, 12% or whatever that day. Put up 30.8 against the Phillies. And I remember that day well. It was a good day. Everybody had fun. Good times were had. But we still have to, in the same way that we're talking about him then, the main appeal is that I thought he was going to be sub 2%. And I'm like, there's a crazy amount of K potential that exists in this arm. And we saw 10 Ks in that spot. I think it's dwindled down a little bit. And part of it is just kind of seeing what that pitch mix really looks like after the only one start we had against San Diego. I just think that if he's not locating it eventually here against any team, it doesn't matter who, that those Ks are going to come down. And I think just because he's getting no swings and misses, with that pitch, he's throwing over 50% of the time now, you're not going to have the ball's going to get put into play more time than is not, just as a result. He's not throwing like 95 or 97 or anything in this spot here right now, coming off of the IL here at the beginning of this season. I just really like kind of being lighter on him. It doesn't necessarily, as opposed to like when we typically say, oh, I'm going to be lighter on him, I want to stack up the other side of it. I don't think Miami has enough upside that I really want to stack the other side of it. It's more of me just hoping he walks a couple dudes, only gets 4 or 5 Ks and maybe goes 5 innings. And then that's the fade for me in this spot. It's not, hey, I really am looking forward to stacking the other side of this one. If you want to do that in a 70,000 person tournament, absolutely go ahead and fire it up. And somebody asked in the premium chat, if you are playing in like the $1 150 max and then the 50-cent 150 max, do you want to have like a different set? Well, play the stacks you really like for the most part, like your favorite lineups in the $1, and then play your least favorite ones in the 50-cent ones, but play 300 different lineups. Don't overlap them. Like, what is that? So $225 investment. It's $4K to the $1. It's $1,000 to the 50-cent. Yeah, you want to win the $1, but I think kind of scattershotting with $225 to try to win even that grand in the 50-cent, that's probably a right way to look at it. That's a nice 4X ROI on the day.
So Mike Campbell on the chat took my example with Miami and is doing that with the Cubs against Wade Miley, who he said isn't
that would be more
interesting
out to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That would be.
See, I knew it. There was something there. I just wasn't smart enough to find the right example.
No, dude, you're way too sharp. Yeah, you got to give yourself more credit. But I absolutely think the Cubs at least have a little bit more potential. Like, this is really where, we can play the ownership game all we want, and eventually somebody's still got to have the potential to go off and to be able to get there for you. I look at the Miami lineup, and we've seen random guys, Jesus Aguilar. I mean, having Chisholm back in the lineup is decent there, but then it's so bleak there. The rest of that lineup, outside of like Chisholm, Aguilar, and a little bit of Jesus Sanchez, I really don't want to be doing much with that team. Brian Anderson, abysmal little year here for him. I thought he was going to be pretty darn good. Let me just pull up his underlying metrics just so that I know I'm not talking out of turn. 357 expected slugging this year, not getting it done, striking out around 27% of the time, just not getting the ball in play enough here as well. I just don't really see it from him. So I look at that as opposed to on the other side of it, going to the Cincinnati side, or looking at this Cincinnati game going up against the Cubs. At least you're getting this huge ballpark upgrade, unless, you're talking Wrigley with the wind blowing out. But going into Great American is just a huge upgrade for just about anybody. And as much as I don't want to say it, like, I just think that there is upside starting with Schwindel, Wisdom, Bodie, and Chirinos, who's been surprisingly good. I mean, those 4 specifically, hard not to at least have some interest in them. Wade Miley's getting a little bit of ownership here. I wish he was even more than the 25% we had there, but definitely not a pitcher that is ever projecting out well here at Awesemo in the top 2 pitcher percentage, nor should he. And so at 25% ownership, definitely give me the Cubs side, specifically Patrick Wisdom, most power out of all of them, 5K. Nobody's going to click on that name. Give me a lot of that in tournaments. I think I have 12% of him. So let me see what his ownership is now. He is at 1.2%. That's the guy you really want to be isolating.
So before I wanted to hit one more thing on the stacks really quick. And again, from the super chat, best way to get our attention, just other questions you have in the final 14 minutes or so before lineups lock for Eric. And a reminder, if you're going to take advantage of Eric's free advice, tap into his brain for free. We don't ask for much, right? Just hit that thumbs up button. Again, the ratio should be a little bit more even at nearly a K watching and only 202 thumbs up. So we just ask you pound away. And of course, make sure you're subscribed. That does a lot for us. Is there, like Cleveland, for example, we talked about just how I don't think either one of us think this is going to match that total tonight at 10 down to 9.5. If you got in at 10 under 10, then you feel pretty good with that thing dropping to 9.5. But point being, of course, Eric Lindquist, is there a stack? And again, I'll arbitrarily cut off from Minnesota up. All right. And just because it's your Twins, although we already took Minnesota out. So San Fran up. Now, San Diego, we talked about. Houston, we talked about. Maybe it's the Rockies who are being, over-owned, but still at home in Coors. Is there a popular / stack that we have predicted to be high that you want no or extremely little part of tonight? If it is a Cleveland, like we talked about, or maybe a team that's even projected to be higher on the slate.
So Colorado's interesting to talk about because if you don't play Connor Joe, you cut your ownership by a crazy amount going to that team. And Connor Joe's not a good hitter. He's 30.2% owned right now. And then the next highest owned is CJ Cron at 18.8%. So if we're looking at the top stack potential of this team, 9.4%, that's very, very good here, but coming in around 14%, take Connor Joe out and play the rest of the dudes. And it cuts down on that ownership exponentially. That's the one thing that I think you always have to keep in mind with the top stacks tool is it does such a great job of encapsulating how the overall ownership of this team reflects compared to their top stack potential, but it doesn't take into account the individual hitters and the way that ownership is breaking down. And so remove Connor Joe, cut him in half, play him at 15% or something, but do not play 30% of this dude. For me, it just seems like a very bad hitter. And yes, in cash games, he's your first batter in. He's the first guy you're probably clicking on every single time in this spot. And under 3K leadoff hitter, you can play Slappy McSlapperson. It wouldn't matter in Coors. They still have the opportunity to have upside here in this spot. But Colorado, I don't mind. The one team that I'm kind of surprised is not getting looked at whatsoever. And, part of it is that Dallas Keuchel is a ground ball pitcher, 5.2 degree average launch angle here in the season. But I love Oakland. I just absolutely love Oakland on this slate. So that's the one team that I want to highlight a couple of things. So Dallas Keuchel is giving up, just short of 39. So 39.7% hard hit percentage. It's a little bit below average here, underneath that 40% threshold that I kind of just have in my brain. 480 expected slugging, only a 14.4% K percentage. And this team does not strike out anyway here. Matt Chapman strikes out 31.5%. I don't know why he sucks all of a sudden, but he does. But Starling Marte was one of my favorite acquisitions here of the trade deadline, getting him out of Miami, Oakland picking him up. You start seeing that price climb, and I've just been playing him as a one-off every single slate. I think now we're not even just talking about one-off. We're just talking about the entire stack because I see so much potential with this team. They can run the bases. They can do so many things that can kind of kill you, that can accumulate fantasy points and stick out from an individual basis for him. But then you have power, even Matt Olson, Yan Gomes in the 4-hole here, 2.8K for catcher. If you want to get off of the ownership that you're seeing here on Austin Nola, some of these other guys, looking at the catcher position specifically, I just think Yan Gomes becomes one of the better tournament guys. I mean, he's 12.4%, but he's under 3K there. I think that just having him in that catcher's position, playing the top end of that lineup, Josh Harrison now, even in the 7-hole, another good acquisition, 3.6K, can play second base outfield for them. I just like this team. And I know it's not the best hitting environment, but they're coming in way under-owned compared to their top stack potential, 5% over on DK, 2.5% ownership share. That's probably my favorite team to be overweight to. I have 15% Oakland stacks here today. So I really want to just highlight them.
Yeah, second most leverage. Again, it's a little bit more than Cincinnati, but again, you're in that 2 percentile as far as leverage is concerned. We're the best at San Diego. It just seems like more of an anomaly. I want you to understand what you're doing to our chat here. Kevin Owusu says he's stuck. This guy is following along with a vomit bag because he's now stuck between Matt Harvey and Steele, and he doesn't know what else to do but throw up with the
Who's
result
having
of this.
fun now? Who's having fun now? I'm having
Feels
fun
like
now.
you after a bender in Vegas.
It's I'm just going full Heath Ledger. I love chaos.
Oh my goodness. All right.
Party.
Is there any final 8 minutes or so here before lineups lock? So make sure if there's anything we didn't get to, and including Slappy McSlapperson,
I was gonna say I thought it was funny. Slappy McSlapperson. I don't know. Don't ask where my brain goes. It goes bad places. It's just Jake Harvey, thank you for that. I thought
they called him up from the EHL, but I could be wrong. So.
Yeah, no, he was playing in the Korean baseball league. That was last year. But I absolutely love this little tidbit I got here. So Andre Jackson is no longer the listed starter in OKC. I got that DM here from one news god himself. Steve Buzzard apparently was passing it along to him. Good stuff. Good talking point here. You need to be playing more of this dude. Like he's 4K. He's 4K. He's 4K. He's 4K. He's 4K. He's not even listed on the DK page. Let me just double check to make sure that is true. And of course, a lot of people are building with optimizers. A lot of optimizers are going to still have him in that pool. It's still going to be something, but I guarantee you anybody hand building lineups, they're not going to land on him at all. Like 0%. Like it's not going to happen. So be one of the people, if you're building some by hand, throw him in at 4K, because I think that there is a definite chance that he ends up being the starter, and whoever it ends up being, maybe it doesn't end up being him. You're not going to get a 0 in that lineup. Be willing to inherit that risk, because this is Pittsburgh we're talking about. If he gets 3-4 innings, it's already viable. There's an opportunity for possibly more. There's K opportunity in that lineup. I absolutely love getting to anybody who's 4K that has any kind of a workload against a bad team like Pittsburgh.
Just looking at a couple of one-offs that maybe we haven't mentioned that even make a stack a little more appealing if you're staying away from a 4 or 5 man stack where you can run a mini 2-man stack. And we can focus on the outfield because you touch on a bunch of guys in the infield, just mentioning different stacks. So as I give you a couple of seconds here to pull up everything, I see your eyes moving, which means your brain is moving as well. So again, if it's FanDuel where you can work a scenario out that you mentioned with Tatis, where you maybe have a couple of guys, or just in general on DraftKings as well, where you're looking at an outfielder specifically as a bat, or maybe even that mini stack to kind of counter not having to run a full stack.
Okay. So that was specifically, we're just kind of like looking in the outfield on FanDuel. No. Mostly where we want to be looking at.
No, both. Look, if it's easier, you could just answer Malcolm Revamp Super Chat, which is just your best third baseman on DraftKings.
Okay. Well, we can do that too. Here's the thing.
Let's do that. He paid for that. I didn't pay you for my question.
One of my favorite things is just kind of hearing your brain operate, because it's moving faster than I talk fast, I think fast, but I feel like you can do it twice as fast as me, which scares the crap out of me. But it's also just a great talent to have. This is why you're so good at radio. So we're happy about that. Third base right now, I love getting some Austin Riley. I know that's not a great ballpark here. A lot of pop here going up against the lefty here. On the other side of it, really 25 homers on the season is just kind of ridiculous. For him to still be at 4,500 on DK, that's a good tournament spot to be going to. Let me pull up my cruncher then here too, just so I can at least see what my ownerships are. So I'm not just talking out of my. So as you're pulling
that up, let me thank Peter Hanley, who sent us the first super chat of the night. It was just $20 to thank you and everybody else here on Awesemo. So as you pull up your cruncher, we cannot let that go without mentioning what Peter Hanley did for us as well.
Peter Hanley's the GOAT. Like, it's just stupid what this guy's doing. The dude wins everything. It is ridiculous.
Is that right?
He's winning NASCAR. He's winning MLB. If they were doing, like park chess, he would have the best lineups in park chess, down over, I don't know. I'm just making up a sport that doesn't exist. I'm just saying, like, he would be like, oh, I've got an edge to that. I'm going to win all the things.
Have Jordan met him? Or could this be like Alex's burner to get around, the sharp plays where he's just banned from a lot of tournaments?
You just said collusion. Like, you just insinuated collusion on an Awesemo stream. There's no collusion taking place, you sick human being. Do not get us all fired.
I'm just looking at my own head. We have
10 minutes left of this show. Don't get us fired. Eytan, just walk the line, my dude. Walk the line. Okay, third base. We're going to third base here. So right now, your two highest owned. I mean, Manny Machado is a fantastic play. He's 5,900. You should play some Manny Machado. I have 32% of him. He's my second highest owned batter.
Wow.
Here. So I will say that. Jake Cronenworth is my highest owned batter. I will throw that out there. 11.2% ownership. I have 35% of him right now. in my 52 lineups. Yes, there we are. All right, moving down the rest of the position. I just really like, I had already kind of brought it up. Justin Turner, I don't know if he'll be in that lineup or not here for the Dodgers. He ended up playing yesterday, so that was good to see. But I had a Q tag next to his name I thought I saw earlier in the day. So I just want to throw that out there. But I like Justin Turner going up against any lefty. Nice to see him come alive. That whole the Dodgers are just a ridiculous baseball team. I can't even process how good they are. So love him at third base as well. And the last guy that I'll kind of throw in. So I said Austin Riley. He's my favorite tournament play. 3.1% for a dude with 25 homers. Crazy pop in any baseball stadium facing a lefty in Miami. He's going to come in underowned. You should have a lot of him.
Real quick, before we get to a couple of home run picks you may have, our buddy Butthole Jenkins, who was thrilled also, Eric, to see you back on shows here.
Kind of sarcasm, but kind of true, I guess.
No. I've always, initially, I thought it was all sarcasm. I think Butthole is legit. Like he
called Alexander Daddario a 6. And so he got the slashed. It was a dumb comment. It was not smart.
Okay. So we shouldn't give him any props for other stuff that's being said because he just had a suggestion as far as a low K guy, but that's fine. Your home run picks could be more.
Yeah, I don't want to play Brett Phillips. Are you kidding me? And again, Brett Phillips had the double donk game, and I get it. Ooh, yes, he hit 2 home runs one time. If we start playing the guys who hit 2 home runs one time, you're going to find a list of people that you don't necessarily want to be playing a ton of. And Brett Phillips, a 330 expected slugging, 175 expected batting average. Yeah, he's 2K. Sure, go ahead. At least he's getting the launch angle up 16.1 degrees, but a K percentage of 39.7%. Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, cut the crap, Eric. Who's hitting a home run tonight?
Look what you did there. I mean, Butto is basically part of the Awesemo community in such a lovely way. We would have nothing to talk about without this dude. So at least, I got to say props to you, my guy. Appreciate you very, very much. So looking over at the MLB player props tool again, I mean, it's something you need to be taking advantage of, and something that you very, very rarely see is somebody around 28% in terms of the getting 28%. What was it? The expected ROI that exists there for it right now is plus 400. I think that's probably a number you want to be getting onto right now. Eugenio Suarez, 3,700, another third base play that we can kind of be looking at. 23 homers on the season, only a 173 batting average. Don't really care. I mean, it's the Cubbies. It's going up, and it's a great spot here for him, for this entire Cincinnati team. I think going up against Steele. Give me some Eugenio Suarez in your life.
I like it, brother. I like it. Under 7.5 Ks for Montas. You're okay with that tonight?
Say that again.
Under 7.5 Ks for Montas.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was pretty surprised it was at that number.
What's our, again, the MLB player props tool is printing money. If you're not looking at that every single day, you are doing it absolutely wrong. So right now, Montas, 7.5. It's basically a flat line. I don't love taking completely the under there, but I think that I think it would definitely be the spot that I would be leaning at. We're looking at a 62% expected win percentage. So better than 50% of that coming in on the under. So I got to be thinking that's still a positive number. But I mean, part of it is that it's so heavily juiced towards that 7.5 number. So, I mean, if the line were 6.5, we'd have a different conversation. Love less than 6.5. Or 7.5, as long as you're not paying a crazy amount of juice.
If you could only do a show in one voice and one character, but you'd have to commit that to the next 6 months of shows, what character would it be? So you can't bounce around and do like, Kevin Spacey one time or, another voice. You'd have to commit to that voice, to that character for the next 6 months of shows, no matter how much shit you got from Jordan and the chat and me. And Lofty and the rest of the Awesemo community.
God, honestly, that one takes a lot of thought. I mean, right now in my current state, I'd have to pick a Sesame Street character or something because I can't freaking speak. Maybe
what about one of the adults?
Jordan Klein. Seriously?
What? Do we have it up? I missed it. Oh, look at that. Look at that. Now, I don't know. Like, you couldn't do her voice, though. That's what I'm saying. Like, Jordan thinks you might.
I don't know about that. That wasn't very good.
Does she have a Southern accent?
I don't know why I did that. It sounded. I was trying to just do like I don't know why my voice is going that direction. Oh my God. I'm so mad at Jordan Klein. It's fine.
Could we just hit
We're
that
back to
last
fighting.
super chat from Tharusha real quick on the way out? And I apologize if I'm butchering your name. I should probably get names right with one that gets butchered all the time. But you see, we have one more super chat for you regarding what to do with the Dodgers. If you can on your way out, Mr. Lindquist, please.
All right. Yeah.
Now, can you do it?
Well, what did you want me to do? You wanted me to do like a Muppet? What was happening? All right.
No. I
roll.
want you to, like, I don't know. Who's your best impersonation? Is it Clint Eastwood? Is it Christopher Walken?
I have a lot of different ones. I feel like the Christian Bale of the Batman would be pretty easy. They'd be pretty good.
Can you answer Tharusha's? There you go. All right. Can you answer the super chat as Christian Bale and Batman on what to do?
A DK. Why am I looking the sun? He's the only LA Dodger pitcher available. I don't think we need to go there. We don't need to play him. He's not going to go more than 2 innings. That's what I got.
I love it. You know what? You better hit that like button out there because you ain't getting that on any other show. I can promise you that.
You're so welcome. Nobody knows that I'm actually, really rich. But I got a cool car. It's fine. So bad.
What's
I don't know.
What's the one thing where he went nuts, right? Where he it was all
on Terminator.
Like, what don't you fucking understand, right? When he's going nuts and yelling at the children. Fucking A, man. Oh, come on. I've heard you curse more than that.
I just did it. It was a joke. It's fine.
All right, we're out of here. Thanks to Jordan. Make sure you thank him in the chat as well. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Eric Lindquist. I want all of the props and all of the shouts sent to him after he wins you money with Matt Harvey tonight on Matt Shander Show. Thank you all. Have a great night. We appreciate you hanging with us. And 11 a.m. tomorrow Eastern is the MLB Strategy Show with Josh and Adam. So we pick right back up tomorrow.
Best of luck.